Yo guys, Theo here on Common Sense. Welcome to another episode of Human Beings, the episode or the podcast where we're very interested in human beings, individuals, what they're up to today, but also their backstory, their origin story, how they ended up where and who they are today. Today I'm joined by an OG within fitness and natural bodybuilding, I would say, Faz. He's a natural bodybuilder, powerlifter and strongman. He's also a coach and content creator about these things, educator, I would say, a husband, I know, maybe a father too. I guess you'll tell me. Hello and welcome, Faz. How are you today?
Theo, thank you very much for inviting me to the podcast. I'm well. I've been looking at some of your stuff recently as well. I love your more holistic approach to content creation. Some of your older videos were really interesting. Some of your thought processes around things. So I thought it'd be nice to have a discussion today. And I'm really glad I'm on. So thank you for the invite.
Oh, my pleasure. I wish I had more time to look into your stuff, but I've been catching up enough so that I think I know like the big picture about you, and I'm sure the holistic part, since that's not something I've seen too much like directly in your content, I'm sure that's something I want to ask you about later. But if you're just to present yourself shortly today, like what are you up to these days?
Okay. Hello, Theo's audience. I'm Faz. Now, just as a brief history of what I'm doing right now, I'm a full-time coach. I'm very fortunate in that I'm in a position where I can do that. I've been doing that full-time now for 5 years. It's going very well. I'm also a sponsored coach on Boost Camp. I have a YouTube with over 10,000 subscribers now, so that's been really good. I do consider myself, like Theo kindly said, I do consider myself an educator first and foremost. I've said many of my audience will know, like I've say a lot, I'm not a YouTuber, I'm a coach. I pride myself more on being a coach. And my whole process is I coach a lot of clients, I help a lot of clients, and then with that, I make videos. So the videos you see on my channel very much are coaching dilemmas and questions and solutions. So I think that what my audience likes about me is the videos are very relevant to what they tune into me for. And that it's actually one of the reasons why I don't tend to delve into more holistic topics, even though I would love to, but it's specifically what my audience looks for. But just in addition, I've been coaching now for 10 years. Initially 5 years, it was part-time. Now it's full-time the last 5 years. In a previous life, I was a school teacher. I taught computer science. That's my undergraduate degree was in computer science, and then I went on to get a teaching degree and a master's, and I started an EDD as well, but I never finished it. That's like an education doctorate. And I've been lifting for 25 years, 43, and yes, natural. So it's that's landed me where I am now. I was actually talking about it with my mother a couple of weekends ago. It's just so wild that this thing I started when I was 17 years old, and I was so passionate about, and I loved lifting for so long. Throughout university, throughout my jobs, even as a school teacher, teaching computer science and video games and stuff like that, it was always, right, I got to go lift later, I get to squat later, I get to bench, and being excited by my goals. And it's amazing that I can do that now and talk to people like you. So yeah, right now I'm living a dream. It's great.
Sounds great. That is great to hear, and it's interesting what you say that you that's why you don't dive into more like holistic topics because this is what your audience wants. It's kind of funny because for me it's almost the opposite. That I am very much a natural bodybuilding bro, huge nerd on that, but my audience expects something a bit wider, from me. So that's a great thing about podcasts, I think, because you get the opportunity to get into things that maybe you won't in your solo content that you do. And then I just want to point out, I like that you described it as this feeling of I get to squat later, I get to bench
Yeah,
later, because that's a
absolutely.
mindset shift. I want people to, even before you found the love for the thing, it's still a privilege to get to work on yourself in this sort of way, and hopefully you'll find the passion for it on the way there, so to say. But so you mentioned some things about your background, and of course, one thing that I love on this podcast is maybe I get to hear something about the person that I've been following that that they typically don't bring up in their typical content. So I would love for you to tell your origin story, as I like to call it. Just where are you born and raised, your sort of family situation, anything specific that you feel like really shaped you as an individual, however much and however specific you want to. Just take it wherever you want to.
It's funny, isn't it, Theo? I think the older you get, the more you realize the reasons you thought you started a thing were maybe not the reasons you actually started. And as I've grown, I've sort of realized the reason I started lifting was maybe not the reason that I originally thought. But anyway, so I started lifting when I was 17. I initially I thought the reason I started lifting was because I noticed girls. And I also noticed that they didn't notice me. So that was a problem. So then I initially I was quite overweight. I remember when I was 15 years old, I was about 15 stone. So that's about 210 pounds, 95 kilos or something. And I think we're getting some feedback on the mic, Theo.
We do.
Like I was saying, and unpause, right? So yeah, so I initially was quite overweight. I spent that first year losing a lot of weight, and then when I was 18, I ran into a football injury. I used to play a lot of football for about 5 years. I played football.
Just sorry, but just to be clear, when you say football, you mean so-called soccer, right?
Yes, yes. I thought I would stick to football because you're my European cousin,
Yeah,
But
but for
yes,
the
for
audience.
our American audience, yeah. I mean soccer. Yeah, I mean soccer, right? So yeah, football. So yeah, I played a lot of football, probably 2 hours a night, almost every school night. Probably when I should have been doing homework, I was out in the field. So I injured myself. I mean, I played. I wasn't very good at football, but I played it. So I injured myself, and my elder brother, he dumped a lot of bodybuilding magazines on my lap while I was recovering. He said, "Here you go, read this." And at the same time, my mother was saying, "Look, you might want to just think about stopping football because you're not very good and you keep getting hurt." So, so this is some home truths, from my family. So I was reading the magazines, and one of the adverts was a book by a guy called Stuart McRobert called Brawn, which I'm sure you've heard of, which was an excellent book. And I had read some articles by Stuart and also some other authors who were in that area. And I thought, great. So I bought the book. And this was about December 1999. And I rang my brother. He was at university at the time. And I said, look, we are going to start this thing. We're going to go to the gym and we're going to get jacked. And he's like, gym? Like, yeah, we're going to lift some weights. It's going to be awesome. So we started January 1st or whatever it was. We were the new recruits in the gym, in 2000. And yeah, pretty much never looked back since. We had some good initial success because we were started off in the right way. So it was a good first year. By the end of that first year, I deadlifted 210 kilos,
Wow.
squatted about 120, I think, benched about 80. So I got some good immediate success. I bulked that year very heavily, and I got some quick gains because I mean, under the tutelage of this abbreviated sort of HIIT style routines, I was only in the gym probably 3 times a week on an upper lower. I made a whole series about this, my first 20 pounds of muscle on my channel, if people want to check it out. And it was just a really good start. I think it was pretty much the ideal start for any kid. I was 18. I'd bulked 40 pounds back up. I'd lost 50 pounds the previous year. And I was on a great routine, all the basics, and I just exploded in gains. It was fantastic. So yeah, that was my beginning. And then obviously girls did notice me, and well, that was nice. So problem solved. I was happy.
Nice. But just so that's all great, and let's keep going from that point in a while. But for me, I consider myself a bit of an alchemist. Like I really like what ingredients form this individual, and so it's not to go into a deep dive together, like to psychologically analyze you, but I like to know little things like. What was your situation like growing up? Like, were both parents around? You had a brother, you told me, because I've seen, I like to guess these kinds of things about individuals. I can see how having a certain family situation, for example, it influences the person who they are today, kind of their archetype and that. So just tell me a little bit about that, however much you want to.
So, I mean, without getting too dark, what I alluded to earlier was that as you grow, you realize the reasons you thought you started lifting, were perhaps not the reasons you actually started. And I think yeah, again, without bringing the mood down too much immediately, but
No,
when I
please,
was, when I,
just sorry, but if you want, you're not going to bring the mood down. Like, I want people to get dark if they want to. I don't want to force
yeah,
anyone, but also
no,
feel
I'm
free
an
to
open book. I'm
express
happy to
yourself.
talk. Yeah, yeah, I'm happy to talk. So, yeah, so when I was 15 years old, my father unexpectedly passed away. Very unexpected, was very a shock to the entire family. So at the time, it was, and we didn't have very much family around. So at the time, it was my mother and us three boys, my sister, and it was a case of taking care of the situation. You ended up growing up very fast, and I think I was 15 years old. I didn't feel particularly strong at the time because I was a child, and it just led to feelings of weakness and vulnerability, which I had. And I mean, I've come to terms with all that now, and it's fine. But I think one of the reasons I started lifting for strength predominantly, because in the first, I would say, 14 years, I didn't really care about looks. It was all about just being the biggest, strongest person in the room and getting into bigger rooms and being even bigger and stronger. I think was I wanted to evacuate and vanquish those feelings of weakness. So I wanted to be the strongest guy wherever I was. So my whole goal was my avenue for that was powerlifting. And it was just an obsessive drive to be as strong as possible because probably because of those early feelings of vulnerability and weakness.
Mm.
So I think that affected me quite heavily. My brothers, not so much because they were older. I was 15. I was the youngest, by the way. So I probably felt that little bit more helpless and more dependent than they did because
Mm.
they had me to look after. So probably I think that was it. So I joke about it like it was girls, but it probably was more of that, I think.
Mm. Well, thank you for telling me that because I think when we put ourselves out there on YouTube, even if we don't try to do that actively, we can sort of like see I'm the guy that knows a lot about this. See, I'm jacked. I know all these things, and to me, I just see that most people that ended up something, impressive, something really, good, well put together person today, they often had to put together, they were in pieces in some kind of way, and had to put together themselves a bit. So I think I just want to show that to people that like what we see today, it didn't come for free, and we're not just it's like, oh, I'm super jacked. I coach. I know everything about this. Like this is how it all started pretty much. But okay, so thank you. But please, I know you had a little of a I think you started more with powerlifting and strongman, and then you transitioned into focusing more on bodybuilding, right?
Yeah, so the first 14 years were all powerlifting, and as well as a bit of strongman smattered in. So I did a strongman competition in 2001, and I also did another one in 2012. The strongman scene in England is really good, by the way. We have an amazing organization. We have North, Midlands, and South strongman with different divisions feeding into the nationals and just amazing. I mean, that's why there are so many British and English strongmen at the World's Strongest Man scene. It's fantastic setup. So in 2012, I was part of this competition, which was really well put together. It was fantastic. I was also involved in a really strange world of grip competitions. So
Mm.
there's a man called David Horn, and he's an arm wrestler. He's known as Mr. Grip. You're nodding your head. I'm sure you've heard of this guy. He's amazing. So he doesn't live very far away from me, or where I used to live anyway. He lives probably an hour and a half drive. So my brother and I did three national grip competitions at his house. It was fantastic. He's so obsessed with arm wrestling and grip. He has an arm wrestling table in his bedroom. It's hilarious. And the competitions were outside. There were a bunch of really quite big at the time strongmen who arrived there as well. Some guys from Europe. I think there was a guy from Finland. I think I remember just enormous guys. And yeah, we went there, and that was I was involved in that for a while. That was really fun. But yeah, mostly strength for the first 14 years. And then after that, I sort of felt I had enough from powerlifting, and I retired in about 2014. And then yeah, there was a short period of time where I didn't really know what I was doing, and I started coaching. But yeah, I competed again in 2018. So yeah, initially it's all just strength.
All
Yeah.
right. So before we get into the bodybuilding, it's completely by coincidence. Now, a few different guys I brought on has mentioned like being into grip stuff,
Okay, right.
and
Yeah.
it's something that's a fairly new interest of mine as well. And I'm always the thing about me is that the bodybuilding part is kind of how I started. Like I started to better my health. I found kind of that, when I just focused on being consistent with good habits, I sort of got the bodybuilding results I wanted when I was younger. And so I've had that as my, health and well-being and just self-development has been at the top. But then I've had fun bodybuilding. But then I feel like there are many things I'd like to get into, but I still have. I started with this later than you. When I was 25. So I still feel like I want to focus on the bodybuilding more still, but I'm trying to think of how can I implement some of these things that I'd be more interested in. Strongman, for instance, is something, a friend of mine is really on me that you should get into strongman. You're like built for it. And it's kind of true. I'm quite strong in my posterior chain, and that. But so grip training, I guess what I want to ask you right now is like personal advice. Like, how do you think is a good way to implement some grip training when your overall focus is on bodybuilding still?
So I think the best way to focus on it is to understand that grip training is a whole science. So there are different facets of grip. So you have pinching strength, you have holding strength, you have curling strength, and I think there's four altogether, and then crushing strength. Yeah. So there are four altogether facets of grip training. And I think if you know that, you can then program them into your week, just like you would with body part split. So you're not doing random things. So I think the first conversation I had with anyone who's interested in grip, because some of my clients have also wanted to improve their grip. And the question is always, what do you want to improve? So we kind of go through it. So then I would set you kind of a routine where you're perhaps hitting each facet of strength maybe once or twice. But this is where it's important to know the categories, because, for example, if you do holds, I'm not saying you do this, but like if somebody was to be new to grip and do holds and farmer's walks and hangs, that's all one type of strength.
Yeah.
It's all holding strength. So I think understanding the different categories is important because pinching does help. I used to do a lot of one finger lifts too. Like I have these straps from Iron Man, there's blue straps. So deadlifts with pinky finger or middle finger or whatever to strengthen individual fingers. Then crushing strength, obviously, but if you overdo crushing strength, that can be dangerous because you can overtrain your grip. So I would say maybe start twice a week with one exercise for the four different facets of grip and see how your recovery is and add that into the end of the session. Yeah,
all right.
Go from
Yeah. So I won't, I've started some already, but I don't have to get into that now. One thing I just want to ask, like the sort of grippers, just the crushing strength. What would you say is the best way to like set reps kind of approach? Because I have a quite like rigid progression schemes I followed, and I just feel like I told Natural Hypertrophy when I had him on, that I just feel like 3 sets of 8 to 12 doesn't seem to be like the right way to go with a thing like that. So if I ask you specifically with that kind of thing, how would you do that?
Well, I have a routine which I follow, but I'm just curious, what are you doing now for your gripping strength? What's your routine now?
Okay. Well, first of all, I just got these also extensors and some like the opposite ones that I don't really know what they're called, but they're more a rubber thing. I use them more for like rehab or prehab, just warming up the grip and elbows. The extensors, it's been so satisfying actually to improve on those. And I can actually see that I've added a little bit of size just on the wrist.
They're good, aren't they? Yeah.
And even this kind of whatever that's called, But then, so what I do, because I've had some hip problems, so I stayed away from heavy hip hinges for a while. It's getting better. Honestly, I could probably, if I just programmed it in the right way, I could probably do it now, but I just don't have to, I feel like. But I'm quite strong, like I said, in my posterior chain. So the grip is definitely a lot weaker than the rest of my body there. So I can quite easily train deadlifts and approach it as a grip exercise. So that's been the main thing now, that I try to like raise 3 sets of 3. That was something Natural Hypertrophy told me, and I just went with it because I don't know what to do, and you got to start somewhere, right? Yeah. I've done some grippers, but it's been a bit more unstructured right now.
Do you use deadlift? Do you use straps on the deadlift?
Well, I would traditionally, but that's what I'm telling you now, that since I approach it as a grip exercise now, I just try to up my pronated, 1 rep max. Like right now, there's like 50 kilos between what I could do with straps and just a pronated grip. But yeah, other than that, I've done like finger curls because I guess, you train the forearms. I think that's a good like bodybuilding grip exercise in a sense, because you definitely train this area. but you're also closing the hand like that. And then the last thing right now, well, I've gotten this pronator, so I just pronate like that. And I got this grip hub, so that you know when you really grab like this, so
Yeah, I've seen
it's
that.
like fingertip strength in a sense. But that's pretty much what I dabbled with so far.
So, what is the ultimate goal with the grip? Because that might influence what I suggest.
So I think because it's still fairly new to me, it just generally speaks to me to have strong
Okay,
hands.
I understand. Yeah, I
But
understand.
also since I am a bodybuilder, I like to try to come like can I get some hypertrophy in my forearms from also
Right.
strengthening my grip?
Yeah, okay. I would actually suggest you do some finger lifting. You can get these straps from Iron Man, which are they're all all five fingers, but just use one or two at a time and do holds and deadlifts with those straps. I found individually strengthening was crucial to gripping strength because it's almost a cheat code. You're individually strengthening each aspect of your hand, and that's
Mm,
going to improve your crushing, your curling, everything. You will feel a lot more confident, but just start slow. It's very tough on the tendons.
mm.
And the other thing is, I would recommend pinching.
Yeah, yeah. The pinching was the one that I thought about when you talked now. Yeah.
Pinching, I found to be very valuable. Just so awkward, you know. But what I was going to say with regards to the straps was, I actually had a bit of a theory about straps, working theory. I think you should use straps because I think the grip is more than just the forearms. Now,
Mm,
think about it, Theo. When you watch strongman on TV and they're doing a holding event where they have to hold on to an object, when the fingers start to slip, what is the other thing that goes?
yeah.
When you're watching somebody hold on some weight, it's always the shoulders slump forward.
True. I'll say
I,
that with this pronated deadlift, I feel like I can't lock out. I'm like I end up like this
Mhm,
when I'm on the brink. You know.
exactly. Right. So I think this is just my theory. It's not backed by science or anything. I know
Mm,
we'll get on to the science talk later.
right.
But I think there is some kind of link between the hands and the upper back. I think there's some kind of primal link. And I think if you are just training your holds, or sorry, just training your deadlifts without straps, you might be doing yourself a disservice because ultimately you are limiting the upper back strength because
Mhm,
the deadlift is a tremendous upper back strengthener, especially
mm,
in that position, right? So I think if you're doing that, you're actually going to in the end limit your grip strength. Now, I would suggest doing deadlifts with straps, but then holds without straps. So once you finish your deadlift, get in the power rack, have a range of motion of maybe, I don't know, just 5 inches, right?
mm,
Raise it and just stand there and let that work your grip without straps. But I've tested this theory numerous times because when I was younger, when I was in my strength days, I was involved in the UK strength community. So that was all powerlifters, strongmen, the whole works. And I specifically remember this doing the rounds, and I've sort of taken it on as my theory. But the reality is, we were all talking about it back in the day. These were high level strongmen, national European level strongmen, and they all agreed grip is much more than just forearms, which people commonly believe. It is 100% related to the upper back. And just for kind of like a n equals one anecdote, when I was at my peak, I strapped all my deadlifts, and at the time, never lost a deadlifting competition, and I could double overhand 220 kilos on a conventional deadlift.
nice.
So grip strength was pretty good, and that was without really training for it. So, and that was strapping everything. So I do firmly believe, and I can't explain it, but I think there's a link between the forearms and the upper back. So
Mm,
I would strap the deadlifts and then do holds.
mm. All right, interesting. You know, just as a random thought that comes to mind, like a friend that I haven't really spoken to in a long time, but very holistic sort of guy, and he would always like make these very interesting connections in the body, like just this that you're trying to like just something you've seen right now.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
for instance, one thing that comes to mind is he would connect different muscles to like different sort of emotional state, or if you will, almost nervous system states. So for instance, a typical one is that stressed people, you know, this area, the upper back, the traps often gets very tight because it's sort of a fight or flight response. Even we get stressed from kind of strange things these days, but it's still the same activation in the nervous system. And so when you think of it, when fight or flight is kind of this kind of protective mode. Like I'm not an expert at this or anything, but it's just something that comes to mind that this body of ours and our nervous system, it's like everything isn't as straightforward as like, oh, you grip with a hand and it's all forearm and fingers, you know.
No, I completely agree. I think that's one of the reasons that studies can often be lacking because they can't always account for all the factors because they test for, some specific things, which is the nature of science, isn't it?
Yeah.
You try to exclude variables and test specific things, but that can miss the broader picture. So yeah, no, I agree. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, thank you. I'll take in and see how I adjust my grip
Okay.
maybe going forward. But so just please tell me a little bit about what it looked like when you transitioned into focusing on bodybuilding.
So those 4 years for me were probably not very satisfying, those original 4 years, because I'm naturally a very competitive person. I always competed in something. And I think for those initial 4 years, that was when I started my coaching. So I was approached by a guy at the gym because I live in a fairly small kind of city, and
Mm,
at the time, because I'd competed, I was a handful of people who had competed, so people knew I was serious about things. And he approached me. He was actually the gym owner of the gym that I was going to, and he approached me and he wanted me to train him. So I said okay. So I started online coaching about 2014, I think it was. And so yeah, 2014 actually. Yeah. So I was one of the first back then, and that was for me, it was fun. Don't get me wrong, it was really fun because it was new, it was fun, it was entrepreneurial, which I was not very good at being a school teacher.
mm.
But it was something about my passion. So I thought this is great. I'll get to make money. And I wasn't making very much money off him. I think he paid me £35 a month that first month. But I got to pour my energy into somebody else who was passionate and was young and was ready to do this. So those 3 or 4 years, I think were fine, and I had a range of clients. But ultimately, when I prepped for my show in 2018 for Men's Physique, I realized it maybe even wasn't the powerlifting. It was just the competition. I loved being in competition. I loved the prep. The prep for me was so fulfilling. Getting back into that competitive atmosphere because I am a very competitive person. It was brutal. Don't get me wrong. Being a former fat kid prepping for a show the first time, it was horrendous. I could tell you some stories about that, but just being in prep was extremely fulfilling for me because I just liked the discipline in my life. So ultimately, I got back into something which I thought was competitive. And now, I mean, I'm not competing anytime soon, but I maintain reasonable shape year round now.
Mm. Yeah, so about the competitive bodybuilding, it just never spoke to me. But I can relate to, I guess, because some people I've heard, because you listen, you follow different bodybuilders. Some people seem to really like showing off the package, but for some people it's almost like, well, that's just kind of the thing to. It's the goalpost that kind of. That's so you have to get into this prep mode that you otherwise wouldn't have because you have this thing you're working towards. So I think I can relate to that. But I just think, I mean, natural bodybuilding is different, but to me, it was never what I was about, like having the spray tan and posing on a stage. But I know it's something I've been thinking about that I'm sure I want to try it just once for that challenge, but I'd be very surprised if I'd like, oh, this is something I want to keep doing. But since you mentioned that about being in prep and difficult being a former fat kid, and you can tell me some stories. Do you have any story?
I said my worst experience was I started hallucinating. That was my worst experience. So
Really?
I was just going to go straight into the worst one. I was doing my 2 hours of cardio a day, and I had this weird out of body experience where I thought I was a kid again, and I was visiting this really traumatic scene as a kid, and like I wasn't even looking at myself. I was the kid again, and so for I don't know how long it was, but I was imagining that scene. And then the alarm went off on the treadmill because you had like an hour. So I'd been walking for a while. And I was so freaked out. I was like, what is going on? So luckily at the time I was working for myself. So I thought, look, clear the schedule. I went straight to my mum's house and I spent the day with her. I was like, I didn't tell her, but I was just like, I need to just spend the day with family. This is too much. So yeah, I stuck to my diet that day, but I thought that's it. I'm having the day off. We went to town and we just did some mother son things, but that was really weird, really weird.
I
Yeah.
think it's good to tell stories like that for some people that maybe from social media and stuff get some unrealistic expectations that, see that to get into that sort of shape, to be a competitive bodybuilder, you have to put yourself through something that apparently you can hallucinate and think you're a little kid again. That's it's
It's
quite,
just ridiculous. Yeah.
I don't want to get into that quite yet. I want to bring up something about fasting later, but just to relate a little bit, I've never gotten down to that low body fat in total, but I've done some pretty extreme fasts, so I've been quite depleted.
Same. Mm.
Yeah, and so my first dry fast that I did, I will say that I don't recommend doing to everyone, but oh,
Ah,
yeah, yeah, that's fine. No, but the first dry fast I did, it's the most extreme one I did so far. So I use snus, it's nicotine pouches, and I drink coffee. But on this fast, I was away from that, away from water, away from food, 3 days, and I used the
3 days.
sauna a lot during this. And I was surprised actually how good I felt at the end. And when I broke it with the coconut water that I hadn't tasted until then, it's kind of a special taste that you have to get used to a little bit. I actually wanted to spit it out, which was shocking to me that you can go do that and not want, be like, whatever fluid is good. But what I want to say is that when I broke it, that feeling was, I felt like I was high for days. Like it was pretty
Yeah.
much because what I might imagine, of course I never tried anything like that, but what I might imagine MDMA would be
Right. Yeah.
like I was like almost manic, that just that I
Mm.
have the self-awareness that it's almost like I'm feeling too good, I'm too productive, too creative. But
Yeah.
crazy things you can do to your body without actually putting any drugs into it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I remember I did well, actually, wait a second. I have to know more about the dry fast, by the way.
Uh-huh.
So, holy crap, that's insane. So, I've never done a dry fast. I want to say I
Mm,
fasted for 5 days as a water fast, but I've never done a dry fast ever.
mm.
Um, the thing that I'm always worried about is the thirst. Were you not just insanely thirsty, dry,
Yeah.
what?
Yeah, yeah, but that's my thing. Actually, my YouTube video I posted yesterday, it was a mindset video. It's called "Just Get It Done." Because when
Yeah.
people say a thing like that, I'm like, yeah, of course, but this is what I was doing, so gotta be thirsty then. But it's very interesting, actually. You sort of adapt to that too, and like I don't want to be the crazy fasting guy that like says that, oh, it's fine, it's nothing, because it is a big stress on the body. So if you're going to do something like that, be careful, prepare for it, and realize that it's a big stress on the body. But it is interesting though, because through fasting, I realized that just regular water, salt water fasting, I realized how food addicted we are. Like even people that haven't necessarily been super overweight, and that we think we have to eat so often, and then when you go through with something like that, you realize that I was really quite fine without it. And doing the dry fast, I realized also that okay, maybe we don't need water as much. Of course, you need water sooner than food, but actually, when I've done 3 days. It's, not as much as the other fast, but I've done that maybe two handfuls of times. And it's usually at the start, but you kind of adapt to it too. It's like the body somehow accepts. I think the body is smart, that if it just picks up on, okay, it seems like water is not available because we're not drinking. Well, let's just kind of turn down that need to drink. But I'll say
Yeah.
it's been a bit different on different. That first one was surprisingly easy on that part. I remember the second one I did after that, it was almost the opposite. That I remember I had brought. Both times I went out to this island that my family owns a house on. I've done this sort of, pilgrimage or whatever. um, but I had brought something to break the fast, like some juice. And already on the first night, I dreamt that I went up and drank the juice, and I woke up and was like, "No, did I fail the fast?" And
Right.
so it is a crazy thing, but clearly, like some people have done insane dry fasts. Like people have gone like 7 days, 9 days. I've heard crazy.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I'm not sure I'd ever try it, but I admire what I admire is the what you said at the beginning was just get it done.
Mm,
Um, I think the mind plays a massive role in all like diet stuff, training stuff too. I
mm,
mean, I think I've been looking at the work of Chris Beardsley recently, and he has this concept of think it's maximum tolerable perception of effort, which is
Mm,
actually the reason why we fail. So we don't fail because muscles fail. We actually fail because our mind just stops us. And I think
mm,
it's a fascinating thing because it fits my reality completely. I think the more hyped up you are, generally the further you're going to take a set and the harder you're going to train. And
mm,
the more aggressive a person is, they generally do better in that area. So I think it's the power of the mind really is tremendous. And my experience was very similar to yours when I did water fasting. And
mm,
that was initially it was more difficult. Once I've just told my body, look, this is what we're doing, then I forgot about it and I was fine. And I think it was very much just under control. I did a recent cut where I did in 10 weeks. I'd done a 42-week bulk, right? So I'd been bulking for a long time.
yeah.
Probably not going to do that again at my age, but
Mm,
it was fun last year. And so I reached about 95 kilos, which was cool, which was nice. And then I did a 10-week cut where I cut down to 80, about 79. So a very rapid cut.
mm.
And
Eight
and
weeks, you
my
said?
sorry,
Did you say 8 weeks?
10 weeks.
10
So
weeks. Oh,
yeah, 95 to 79 or
mm,
78 in
mm.
10 weeks. So about 17 kilos or so.
That is quite fast.
Um, yeah, a lot of water and bloat and everything, but quite fast. And I logged it all on my sort of private Discord. And yeah, a lot of my attitude for the people asking, my clients, was just, look, get it done. And
Mm,
some days it was 1,000 calories, 1,200 calories. Other days I was very much like almost like an ego lifter, but for diet. I
mm,
would purposely push myself. So I would eat maybe 8 o'clock at night rather than 1,200 calories. I'd push myself even harder. I didn't have a cheat meal for probably 7 weeks because just get it done. I admire that attitude when people do it because this is what we're doing. Just execute the plan. Stop
mm.
complaining and let's just get it done.
Oh
Love
yeah.
that.
Oh yeah.
Mm.
The way I see it, I picked that up from, I don't know how much you know about my backstory, but the short version is that, I was a completely different person. I had the opposite habits, pretty much no habits, just eating a lot of junk food, drinking, partying, weed, not really exercising, turning the days upside down, just escaping life through vices pretty much. And then I had this moment when I had a huge panic attack, which was the first of many. And that's pretty much the most intense stress and fear you can feel. And I just understood at that point that I'd always been running. I had known certain things I should change, but I had not found it in me to just get it done, right? But now I just saw that, okay, my options here are going to be live as some kind of like shut in for the rest of my life, or be a medicated zombie, or I'm going to end up killing myself because I have quite a traumatic and history of depression, anxiety, and this I thought I'd like to check out from this life kind of, but that felt like there's an enemy within, and when you realize that it's almost like it's a threat, someone within you is like I might kill you because this is so terrible. That's when I found it in me at my absolute worst. I realized that I have to expose myself to these situations that I just want to run from now. And so I had like 3 months of self-imposed like exposure therapy. And so the way I see it now, it's like, because that felt also, by the way, it felt like so much longer. Because just like being on some kind of psychedelic drug is what I would compare it to, like tripping, like you lose the sense of time, it feels like it's much longer. Pretty much the same thing with that. Every day is like this infinite struggle of where a huge part of it is like a panic attack. And I just over and over have to push the limit for how much I can face this. So of course I couldn't every day, every time. But I think that's what I found on the way. The connection I made is that when I came to a point when I no longer have panic attacks, but I'm still like quite worn out, right? But I'm now like so grateful that wow, I thought maybe my life is over, maybe I screwed up permanently, but okay, I can actually at least go about my days like a normal person like that. So I'm like, okay, should I try this with giving training and eating better a shot, And I got such a quick feedback, like good response from that. And I'm like, okay, this is the way to go. And quite fast, I saw that, I want to run from it. I don't want to train. I feel this resistance towards it. I'm not good at it. I get sore. But I'm feeling better. So fast, I felt better. I think I made a connection that if I could just get what I need to do done, it will be better in the end. So I think that's what I'm lucky. I consider myself the lucky one in the end. I understand that it's hard to find it in you to push like that when you've not like really been like you're gonna die if you don't just do this.
Mm. Leo, I had a brief understanding of your history, but to hear it from your own words there is amazing. First of all, I'm really glad that you found the strength to change. That's tremendous because I think a lot of people don't.
Mm.
What an inspiring story! What an absolutely incredibly inspiring story. Um, wow, just wow. So, how long were you going through this for with this? Sorry if I'm repeating things your audience already
Oh,
knows.
no, sure. It's interesting when someone else asks. It's just not me doing the same kind of thing. So you ask how long?
Yeah, how long did you struggle with this for? And was there any singular moment? Because I think I want to just add my bit in after I've let you speak, but was there any singular moment, or was it just a combination of things that led to an awakening that you said?
Yeah, so leading up to the panic attack, how I describe it often is that something like when it happens, it's like it's a shock. You cannot be prepared for that.
Mm.
But when it was a fact, it was like, okay, this is not so surprising really, because I've been going around feeling this kind of existential dread, feeling very lost in many ways. And of course, I know now in a different way how much I've worn myself down with these poor habits over years. Not taking good care of myself at all. I've been studying journalism and just realizing that I don't want to do this at all. I've just wasted time. I'm in debt over this. I was still kind of, hadn't let go of a past relationship. So it's all these things I think just came tumbling down on me. Yeah, from that point, I knew immediately that this was not the first panic attack. This was the first of many, definitely. And it was this gradual exposure therapy that what I did was that I went on sick leave. Because I felt I need a break, but I need that kind of routine that I have to get out and go somewhere at least. So that was sort of the program. I've described it now, the perfect program to overcome the panic attacks. But some days I like when I come down to the subway and see all the people, I'm too overwhelmed. I have to turn around. Some days maybe I get to work, but I cannot be there the entire day. But it was this, just not talk too long about it now. This and some other situations. I was in a choir at the time, and with that, like concerts and things, I definitely had to face this. So
Yeah.
it was progressive overload. Okay, these concepts.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
what
yeah.
I do with my holistic bodybuilding, right? That I see it as you work on yourself holistically, but bodybuilding has been a cornerstone for me. And it's so nice to take these concepts from the gym that are a bit more like straightforward, adding weight to the bar, adding reps. But when you apply it like that, being longer in a situation where you feel like running away, being in an even more stressful situation. And then eventually, I taught my body that because what I intuitively understood that I know now understand is the nervous system, right? That I rewired my nervous system to no longer see these situations as a threat. And so this happened late February 2018 first. I would say somewhere around late May, 4 months or so, I actually wasn't getting panic attacks anymore. And I had started training in July the same year.
Wow. Wow. That's incredible. I do think there's a strong link between the body and the strength of the body versus sort of the peace and calm and strength of the mind that you, I mean, obviously you had a very strong mind anyway, but just in terms of more the inner peace of the mind, I think there's a strong connection. I've been quite fortunate in that I've never really suffered anything like that. I had a brief spell with a very bad year that I had in 2020, but aside from that, I've always been okay in that respect. And I do wonder whether that's sort of cause or effect, is it correlation? Is it whatever? Because I've almost always done some type of hard physical activity since I
Mm,
was probably 12, 11, 12 years old. And I
mm.
do wonder if there's a connection there.
Oh,
But
100%.
I don't know.
What
Yeah.
I'll say about that, what I started noticing that when I didn't get panic attacks, those situations could still feel like a bit triggering. Like I could just feel a little bit like, okay, now I'm around a lot of people here, that kind of feeling. And when I just that's the first thing I noticed from my training literally was I did negative pull-ups following a progression scheme, 15 minutes per day, 3 times per week, and I just removed the obvious junk in my diet that ate what I thought was like good food. At the time was pretty much rice, chicken, broccoli, which isn't the most nutrient dense, but it's a lot better than just like pizza, kebab,
Yeah.
beer, that kind of stuff, right? But what I noticed, because to return to what you said, was that when those anxious feelings started coming up. I felt like there was like a sort of a lid on the pot that just kept it from like boiling over. So there's definitely a correlation. And the way I see it is that you work on these things in two ways. You strengthen the hardware so that you actually don't get the same physical stress response. And then it's the power of the mind also to be able to stay present within the stress and not freak out and just act accordingly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've noticed correlations with my clients. I mean, one would think the best clients are the young guys at college or that have a lot of time on their hands, but very often they're not. They don't have that degree of sort of killer instinct and getting the job done that
Yeah.
a lot of my older guys have. My most successful clients very much are family men with fairly high profile jobs, like those guys who are in positions of authority. I had a client who I worked with him for about 3 years. He was a CEO of a large medical company in America, like an absolute shark. This guy was on it. His entire day was scheduled out. He had a secretary, everything, and he did it. He gave me a tour of his house once, like on the phone. Insane, and a sauna in his backyard. But anyway, he just needed guidance. And once he got the guidance, he just ran with it because he
Mm,
was just used to executing
mm,
tasks and getting things done. We keep going back to that phrase, getting things done, but
yeah.
it's always been the way. And I find it's just so it's 100% a mindset thing. And I think with these high achievers, what I see is training and diet. I lay down the specifications and it's just another task in their way, which I
Mm,
just walk right through. And I love that. Being a competitive person, I love that attitude of just running through your
mm,
tasks for your day. I think it's great. Yeah.
completely.
So no, I think there's definitely a strong connection. And yeah, I think it also helps with mental health too. Like I think there aren't that there is a stereotype of the sort of dysfunctional bodybuilder. I think a lot of that probably comes from steroids,
Oh yeah.
uh, and not actually, But in my experience, for natural bodybuilders who are well put together, they tend to be sharks in most areas of their life. Work, relationships, and all. They tend to be well put together and usually fairly intelligent too. That's
Mm,
what I've seen. I mean, you look at the people in our evidence-based sphere, natural hypertrophy, we're talking about him just now. Great guy,
mm,
super helpful. Um, yeah, Paris, Ball Domini man, also,
yeah.
super nice guy, and Landon as well, and a bunch of others. And I find these are intelligent guys
Oh
who
yeah.
have created great physiques as I think as an extension of just the whole mindset and attitude of let's just get this. And I love that. I think it's great. I have a bunch of friends who are all entrepreneurial, and I love being able to share wins, with my business, with their business, and that's my circle. We all have those types of. We're all business owners essentially, and yeah, I just find that a good circle to be around.
Oh yeah, so many things I think about there, and I'd like to we'll start talking a bit about, more about coaching, but just to
Mm.
respond to some things you said. Well, first of all, it's funny because I think a lot of people that are not into bodybuilding like would think they're meathead, like all bronze, no brains or something. But that's what I see too. That in order to get the good results, you kind of have to be smart. You have to figure out how it works. You have to
Yes.
be curious and introspective in that sort of way. But then the other thing you said, like I said, we probably have slightly different clientele. But so because of my own backstory, okay, I have a little bit of different kinds of clients. That I have some of the kind that you described, sort of entrepreneurial, where when you just tell them this is the plan, they just execute. But I also get some where they struggle with the actual execution. And then it's more about then you become almost not a therapist, but that's what I see
Yeah.
too. A
Yeah.
person like me, like honestly, first of all personal trainers, even they become a life coach on some level. I think sometimes not that I have to like analyze a person so deeply with them. It's just that it's a little space for someone to have their free time and talk a little bit about their life and also train, right? But yeah, so it becomes, I think someone like me that's both into the bodybuilding and very nerdy with it, but also has this sort of background, struggle with different kinds of addictions and just limiting beliefs and so on. That I get some people where it's almost instead of the program, it's more about untying psychological and emotional knots so that they can actually execute. But the last
Yes.
thing I'll say about that is, especially online as a content creator and people reach out and they ask you things and that something I've learned is that some people, they just ask stuff, and they never execute. They're so-called ask holes, right? Yeah.
I thought you were going to say that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
but I think as a coach, because I genuinely started with this because I was so happy with the turnaround I did in my life. So I'm just like, I want to be in service now. What's the point of just keeping this all for myself? People need to know. But so when you learn that, because I've invested too much in certain people that I just shouldn't have, looking back. But when you get presented with what I see is often like some young guy in the gym that starts talking to me, and I see that they really like, they see that I can learn from this guy, and I see that they listen to everything I say. I get so excited. I'm just like, I'm gonna just drop everything I can on this guy now. You love that as someone that just gets it done. You know that I know how this works. So if I have a person that will get it done in front of me, I just have to tell them what to do, and they will get it done.
Yeah, I think with my experience as I was a school teacher for 15 years. So I think while I personally have a very competitive spirit, um, being a teacher has really taught me to nurture these people who don't have that sort of level of killer instinct. So it's funny you said that about being a life coach. I think I make the joke that sometimes my job feels like a PT mixed with kind of a barman, like just serving drinks and telling jokes and talking about life. But it is, you're right. That's what happens sometimes. Sometimes you can't really get to the meat and potatoes of the routine and the diet without, first of all, sorting out their lives and untangling their stress and giving them suggestions. So, me having been through the life experiences I have now, having been through, worn different hats, philosophically saying, I can offer suggestions on how I figure out my routine and things. And I do, like, I think going back to what we talked about originally, I think I would like to speak more holistically. Whenever I try to do those videos, they're always well received. Like I made some videos about emotions and anger and sadness, and people like them. People really enjoy them. I don't always feel comfortable because I just find it's a large responsibility. And I think when I'm working with somebody one to one, I'm really happy in that role where I can be a life coach, I can be a mentor. And if they're not a shark, I can sort of help them get on the right track. But on a large scale, I always find it a little bit, I don't know, it just seems like a lot of pressure, like a lot of responsibility. Because if I give the wrong message, let's say I give the wrong message about training, which I don't think I do, but let's say I do, it's just training. Whereas if I give the wrong message about mental health,
Mm.
I worry. As teachers have that whole social responsibility thing. It's drilled into you from day one. I worry about sharing my political beliefs or sharing my beliefs on mental health because I don't want to steer anyone wrong. I do generally try to promote Men's Health Month every year on YouTube, like November and stuff. But in terms of actually talking about it, I would love to talk about it more. I just find it's a lot. So whenever I'm on a podcast like this, I like to talk about it, but I find it's a big responsibility. I'll talk about it more with my one-to-one clients and things, but I mean, I'm happy to touch on it today. It's just that's always what's put me off. It just seems like a large responsibility to do it in public. That's all.
Interesting. It's very interesting because I almost feel the opposite. That I guess it's probably because I've struggled a lot with mental health before. And the way I see it, a person like me, and I try to be open with that, is that like right now, I've started the year great. I feel good. Like I told you before the call, I'm stressed in a good way, like from like too much good stuff going on.
Yeah, yeah.
But I am the sort of person that I had a very, like, we don't have to be detailed about that now, but I had a violent, unsafe home. So I've developed like sensitivity and what I feel like I experience emotions, the nervous system states like far out on both sides of the spectrum. Like on the one hand, because of my experiences, I think I get to experience like the positive emotions and that in a more profound way than many. But I am also someone that will every once in a while like be very, very hard on myself and get anxious and put all this pressure on myself and stuff. So I think it's because I see that for some people, it's definitely that's just what you have to roll with. That's the hand you've been dealt. And now, how do we go about it now? And because I think that I've managed to find some really good solutions to my own problems, that I don't talk as if like this is the 100% scientific truth, but I will. That's why also I share. My sort of mental health and spiritual advice is very much based on my experience. So I feel like I'm never claiming that this is some kind of objective truth about how to go about things, but I feel like, you know, I can be sort of an authority a little bit on that kind of thing because I have a lot of own experience. But what wanted to come to, because I want to ask you just a little bit practically how you work with clients, like what that looks like. But to me, I think it's this effect that when you know a lot about things, you also realize how little you know about certain things. And
Yeah.
I feel like I take too much responsibility for clients sometimes. I'm like, how will I get them to do this? Or how do I like, when I'm not there with them, how do I kind of transfer this? So I almost can feel a little insecure about not my knowledge necessarily about natural bodybuilding and coaching, but I'm just like, am I really managing to like what I put together as my just actual coaching product? Am I actually able to deliver the thing that will take them to the result? So that's just kind of interesting how we have the opposite thing going on there.
Well, I mean, maybe today I'll learn something from you in terms of content creation, and maybe I should make more stuff about talking about mental health because when you shared about your situation there, it was genuinely almost I don't know what the word is for me. It's relieving to hear, you know,
Mm,
like it's relieving to hear other men from across the world,
yeah,
um, sharing those experiences, which we have all experienced to a certain degree. I'm not saying I've experienced what you've
sure,
experienced, but
sure.
to a certain degree, and it is nice to hear that. Actually, it's nice to have just speaking just speaking away from the podcast for a second, just man to man. It's
Mm,
nice to hear that. Actually, it's quite. I feel like I have a connection with you, and so
mm.
maybe I should speak about that kind of stuff more often. Maybe that's a lesson that I need to take back to my channel. So yeah, no, I don't think what you said was in any way could any way be misconstrued at all. I think it was a very positive message. So no, I like it. And one thing I liked about your content that I've looked into the older stuff where you talked about the mental health is
Mm,
there wasn't this here is the one solution. It was more of this is more of a personal thing that I'm sharing how I dealt with this particular situation coming from my background, and people can either people can either learn from that or they can correlate from that as well. You can always
mm.
get something from it. Maybe it's not your situation directly, but you can at least form correlations. Go, okay, fair enough. That connection in my head. So I think ultimately it probably is quite helpful. I've always been, as I say, I've always been sort of concerned about alienating my audience. But I think if you signpost the video and say, look, this is going to be this type of video, I don't see how anybody could complain. So yeah, maybe I'll do more of this.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think what you said there, I'm glad that you got something out of me sharing that. But that's
Yeah.
what I worked on because I think it's easier for me to talk about how things used to be, like because that feels like I'm talking almost about a dead person, while the part talking about when you have an audience that some of them like really look up to you, and they sort of yeah, I know that I've almost thought sometimes that I'm supposed to be this like almost invincible hero figure. It's an interesting thing being a human being with an ego and have like thousands of people give input on you,
Yeah.
right? But I've noticed that when I dare to talk about how things can still be difficult and how I deal with them at those times and that, it's really helpful because a lot of people is like, then, it's just not me. Like even the guy that I'm following and really like look up to and admire, he is still struggling. Like, that's like kind of relieving to hear that nothing's like wrong with me in the sense. It's like
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
have similar struggles and problems to deal with and overcome.
I think another thing which I like about your interviews in general, but also the way you're speaking is I've found that well, for one, I think you're very good at digging into other people's stories. I've found in my experience with speaking to people who do have mental health issues is they can sometimes if they're not finding a way out of their situation, sometimes they can end up speaking a bit too much about themselves, and I
Yeah.
think that can lead into this sort of you understand, yeah. It's a thought that I've had, but again, I'm not an expert, but I think sometimes I know of a few guys at the gym, for example, and all they ever post about is mental health, but if you speak to them, it's always just a conversation about them, their
Mm,
mental health, and I find that very difficult because I think for me, life is about I've always been a teacher, life, and I find enrichment, like you shared with me earlier. You said you get really excited when you have somebody who wants to learn from you.
mm,
That keeps me young. It keeps me when I have a class full of 30 students with their eyes on me, or I have an audience on YouTube. If I'm teaching somebody something in a one-to-one capacity, I feel that keeps me young. It keeps me in a good mental place. I feel life should be about what you can do, not what you look like or who you are. I really struggled with sort of showing myself at the gym or showing my physique. when I first got on YouTube. I didn't see the point. I mean,
Mm,
when I was a school teacher, nobody cared what I looked like. I was just a voice in front of the
mm,
classroom. It just it's my voice. But ultimately, it's nice to have that. I think so. Yeah, no, I think that's a nice part of it. I think you have to be. I think altruism and being interested in other people, I think, is very, very good for your mental health in general. So
mm.
yeah, that's another thing.
Completely. And I appreciate that feedback because it's interesting. I've definitely been a person when I was a less developed version of myself. I could definitely be too self-centered. And it's interesting because we're so complex as human beings. Because many times, like I just take an example that it's also kind of just the way certain people speak, like myself, that we use ourselves as an example of a point we're trying to make. It's not really about me right now, you know. And I made this video like, assume I'm natural. And I just express at the start that I can get a little annoyed with certain accusations. But then I go on to make a point that you would have a lot to benefit from assuming that I'm natural, you know, because now you're not
Right.
putting these limiting belief on yourself that, no, it's not possible. He has great genetics. He takes steroids, whatever. So the point is not really about me, but some people don't really get that. Like they want to be, and I appreciate it's guys that want to be nice to me. They were like, bro, I understand that you're natural because this and this and that. I'm like, yeah, well, thanks, but the point isn't really that now. I'm always speaking to the haters. Like you can do it too. But so it's a fine balance sometimes with sharing your stories, your thing. I notice it's a balance about because you have to let it be a little bit about yourself. Like it's my YouTube channel, right? But not let that take over. Like just listen to me tell you about me all the time. And I see it. I'm not going to mention names, but there are people in my life that do similar thing. And I see
Yeah.
that it often when you start, maybe you have to when you're finding your voice, you kind of have to focus a bit on you and your story. And I
Mm.
actually got that feedback years ago from someone that, it's a cool story and I understand the point you want to make, but now I feel like it's time to move on and try to include and invite other people a bit more. And I totally got that point. So
Everything I've seen of your content, I don't think it comes across like that now. I think you come across as very well balanced. So no, I wouldn't worry about that now at all.
no, I appreciate that. I don't really, but I guess it's a little fear. When you have minor insecurities, you want to be understood. You want people to know I'm actually trying
I
to
see.
help you.
Yeah.
I'm not just all about like, look how fucking great I am. Because that's
Mm.
another thing. I will make that kind of point when I'm super confident and talk highly of myself. But it's not really, again, to display that I'm so great. It's like, see, if you did things that I'm telling you to do, you could feel this way about yourself. And it's a great feeling.
Yeah. Well, that might get people not on your side. Some people don't like to hear that. So
Yeah.
they don't like success or people being happy. It's you're always going to get some haters.
Yeah, yeah. But if we're getting into that kind of thing, it's what I see is those guys that get upset with it. It's actually those are the guys that are most like me. But then because I've seen this with myself. I made a video recently called "Your Triggers Are Your Teachers," and I
I
told
saw
a
that.
story.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I told a story about someone when. At first, I felt like triggered, like intimidated, like he's doing too much of this. He's taking too much space. He's too like loud. And then I
Yeah.
realized that it's because he's like me. He's just more there. He's more developed than me, and I kind of criticize myself through him. I make it the opposite. I know he is wrong, but it's actually I'm not afraid of doing that, and I'm stubborn. Not everyone. You have to put a limit on how much you engage with haters. But I'm kind of like I see that if something just clicked for you, you have potential, man. That's why you're so upset right now because you know you could be all this.
Mm.
So that's kind of I'm just like I'm just gonna make these gains. I'm just gonna make insane progress. I'm just like now I can change people. I can take the hater and just like shake him hard enough and
Yeah.
get it.
I mean, your account is almost double mine. How have you dealt with sort of those types of comments? I'm sort of just getting used to it. I feel
Mm,
like my channel is almost on the cusp where I'm sort of getting to that point where I'm inviting a lot of random comments from one comment, faceless commenters, and
mm,
it can be difficult to know what to do with them. Like
mm,
I don't want to engage because I don't want to come across in any kind of weird way. But at
mm.
the same time, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, it's a good question that I think about this too, because I saw that when it was newer to me, I think I overdid like engaging with people. That it's almost a little addictive to just get into things with people. But in the same time, I see it as I want to do it. I just try to like be honest with myself now that am I am I actually like arguing with this person to try to make some greater point that even for the other people reading this, or am I just getting into an ego war now and just have to beat this guy with my words? So I try to just be introspective about it. Um, but yeah, it's again being a sensitive person, as I would say, that I can really feel like. I want to. I no. I need to tell you how it is.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
it's a constant battle. I think I'm finding my balance with it because I am a highly extroverted person. So I very often when I just like explaining things like no, this is not the point. Let me tell you how it is. So yeah,
I,
I'm going in circles with it a little bit, but that's the point that I will engage a lot also because of my personality, just who I am. But I try to be honest with myself, like, because sometimes it's like even being angry at the person. Sometimes it's like, okay, I think, like, no, don't come here and talk shit to me. This is my YouTube channel.
yes,
But
yeah,
sometimes it's coming from the wrong place when I'm just like, I need to beat this guy to somehow, I don't know, prove to myself and everyone that I'm better or something.
I read an article many years ago. It's a psychology article where it was talking about Reddit conversations in particular, but it was saying you can tell the degree of dysfunction that somebody is working with by how they react given the level of freedom and anonymity that you give them in a
Mm,
situation. So, for example, they started with face-to-face conversations. People normally are usually cordial, and face-to-face interactions, which are in a negative way, tend to be avoided. But as soon as you give them one degree of either anonymity or safety, immediately you start to see dysfunction, which arises. And they started off just if you're in a car next to somebody, like they can start shouting at you and wind the window down, swear at you
mm.
and everything.
It's a good
And
comparison. I often do that with people in the car and behind the,
yeah,
the keyboard. Mm,
yeah. So yeah, there's that, and then obviously Reddit is clearly the worst because you're completely anonymous, and same with YouTube as well. And so you're afforded, and they even looked at how you treat waiting staff in restaurant because
mm,
there's a degree of protection there. It's not anonymity, but there's a degree of protection there because
mm,
they are sort of serving you, and so how you treat them also shows your level of dysfunction. So the article was trying to say the greater the dysfunction you have, the worse you are when you're afforded higher and higher degrees of anonymity
mm,
and safety. And this is why you often get some of the most psychotic people in like positions of either power, or you get like Reddit bros who are just talk absolute nonsense and
mm.
because they have complete anonymity. And I do wonder, to tie it back into what you were saying, I do wonder with some of the comments, how much can we actually help these people? Because some of them just appear to be entirely dysfunctional, and
Mm.
it's quite, I never saw that in a classroom. I really liked teaching. I never had a problem with the students; they were great. So you never really get that with students face to face. But online, it's just all manner of dysfunction. It seems.
Mm.
Yeah. So who knows?
Yeah, I think about that. It frustrates me, like the thing with anonymity. I guess certain because there is like censorship going on in the world and online. So there's a part of me that wants to be like, well, the ability to be anonymous at least makes it so you can discuss certain things that are like censored. But on the other hand, I'm just like, but why should you get a voice anonymously and just be able to just talk to someone and say what publicly like that, just state if it's like the steroid accusation, like just lies about someone that really attacks their livelihood. So I have very mixed feelings about a thing like that, but that's also why I feel like if I sometimes respond a bit angrily or something, first of all, that's another thing about dealing with it, that because I can feel like I want to handle every interaction perfect. I have this perfectionism still that we all struggle with to some degree, I think, but also letting go and because your audience is often more forgiving to you than you are. Like if you've been like I see that you are too, like a genuine guy, that your core audience will not just abandon you and think you suck because you came off a bit emotional at some point or something. But what was it? And one last thing about teaching. If we can teach these people. I have had people come around sometimes, like you, after you told me
Yeah.
that I had a big think, and you're like, yeah, you made me realize. So that's what I mean, that I'm stubborn like that. I want to try but it's again about where do you put the limit. You have to see when it's a lost cause, you know. So if I get into something with someone, I will often be like, okay, if they keep like arguing with me after this response, I'm done with this. But the last thing I'll say is one reason sometimes to keep argumentation going is for the other people reading the comment. It's not actually about that individual. It's about showing something to the other people following along.
Absolutely. No, I totally agree. Yeah, yeah. It's interesting you hear you talking about audiences turning. I sent you a link to a video
Mm,
before we got on air.
sure.
Um, by the time this is released, if you don't mind me bringing this up, I thought it
No,
was.
please, please.
I mean, I'm not going to say it was amusing. It was slightly amusing, but also I think, there's a serious side of it. But anyway, on Dr. Pack's channel,
Mm,
there was an interview with Mike Israetel, and they were discussing some of Mike's um, views and also some views of him recently, which have been expressed by, I think the public sentiment has been changing towards him for a long time. I've certainly noticed
mm,
it. But also there was some fairly influential videos by a guy from England, actually, called Solomon Nelson. And then also he was interviewing Lyle McDonald in those videos. Shout out to Solomon and Lyle. Actually, I'm a big fan of both. But they were doing particularly one last video, which was very critical of Mike, breaking down everything that he said and done and the contradictions within a 4 hour episode. And I think the Dr. Pack said in the comments that this video that he recorded with Mike was recorded 2 months ago,
mm,
which is fine. I believe him.
mm.
But a lot of the comments were really, the comment section was really very critical.
Yeah.
What are your first impressions of that? I mean, I'll just say for the record before I say for the record, I don't think like public ganging up on Mike is great. I think people can
Mm.
get carried away with that, and I think in the end we are dealing with humans here. So
Yeah.
I don't fully agree with burning him at the stake, but at the same time, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, it's actually that's exactly what you're bringing up now. When you sent me that video and I started reading through the comments, like of course because it's not me, I will laugh a little bit because I also have criticisms towards Mike,
Yeah.
and I think it's a little different also when someone has like millions of followers, and I think sometimes have like not spread the best information and also the attitude about it. It's like you have to expect some of that, but also I know that I say myself that I'm quite sensitive, that I've never like start crying or like get hugely stressed out, but I can feel like, yeah, it's something to deal with. And I just imagine having like so much more, you know. So that's why I tried to, because I made a video talking a bit about Mike too, very, very unscripted off the top of my head. That kind of video, I can always feel like, there were certain more things I would have liked to say, both good and bad, actually. But in my kind of format, it just has to be like that sometimes. But I tried to, like, the title is a little like, oh, Dr. Mike is wrecked, you know, kind of thing, just to bring some attention to it. But then I tried to be kind of nice, that I point out the things I don't like, but I try to show a little bit the human side that I think my analysis of why I think he is a certain way that I can see, because I know my own insecure and less good behaviors that I could still have to some degree, but especially in the past when I was a less developed person. I try to sympathize with a person and see, even if I want to criticize them, to see where they're coming from, right? And so, yeah, specifically about that, when I read through the comments, I laugh a little bit again because it's not about me, but I'm just like, this it is a little much now. It's everyone, it's only cool to hate on Mike now. Let's just get in on this and be like this, not a fairly balanced. I try to be nice in my critique, and so yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's a little much, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's certainly reaching a peak. I think the comment section, if anybody hasn't seen the video, the comment section was almost, I would say, 95% negative. Yeah, and and also I would say a lot of it was fairly accurate as well. I think this is the
Mm,
thing. I don't think for me it's the bad information. Like some of the escalating volume, aggressive bulks, high volumes. I don't think it's that, because we all make mistakes. We all say things which aren't quite true. I think for me it's the attitude and the lack of taking responsibility.
yeah,
I think that is, and I think some of the cover-ups, like we all know the thing he said now, which is he said very famously he wants to do a competition or whatever, be successful, to show unequivocally that RP's methods work or whatever. And then he went back on that. And
yeah,
that was a very obvious PR stunt. And I think like it's there for everyone to see. The unfortunate thing is you can't hide those things. So you have to own up to them when they happen. And if
Mm.
somebody has video evidence and then putting side by side together saying, look, you're clearly contradicting yourself and you're an intelligent man, you know you're contradicting yourself. I think you have to own up and go, yeah, fair enough. I'm sorry about that. And I think when he tries to gaslight the audience by saying, look, I didn't say that, and he repeats the lie,
Mm.
people aren't stupid. And if you're, I think if, as a content creator, if you're trying to, if he's trying to almost insinuate that people are stupid and will forget, people really don't like that. They get very angry with that kind of thing. I think
Mm.
gaslighting your own audience who pays you and makes you earns your wage is not a good idea.
Yeah, but at the same time, though, like, yeah, some people are not stupid, and you will see that. But that's the thing, that a person in that position knows that they have such a big following, and some people
Ah,
they
yeah,
follow that guy. They don't click anything else, you know. So he knows he will get away with it for a lot of people. So when you have millions and millions, even if you or say that you lost hundred thousands of followers, it's like it's not that big of a deal, even, because he's not done something that bad. It's not like, oh, it turns out he was a killer, you know. It's not not that thing.
yeah.
So and that I think he's aware of that too. You know, that's why you don't even have to own up to it. You know, and
There
then you're
was
really looking out for yourself more than for like the greater good of the people that follow you.
Yeah, I think if anything, that's even more annoying. But
Mm,
there was one guy who was replying to all the comments, really, really pro Mike, just
mm.
one lone warrior, just
Always one of
full
those.
fight. So yeah, yeah. So, but anyway, like with regards to, I think what Mike is going through is probably fairly natural with a lot of content creators. Greg went through it years ago.
Mm,
You reach a peak, a culmination. A lot of people hate you. And then from that point, you either fall off rapidly or you sort of persist and get better. Um, More plates, more dates, also very much like that as well. He kind of reached a peak of mainstream popularity. He had a different tactic because he sort of shifted into different directions and went bigger with his podcast into other directions. But I think
mm.
it's fairly normal and natural for a YouTube content creator to reach a culmination, reach a peak, reach sort of peak hilarity, and then you get a lot of criticism. And from that, you either are reborn, like the proverbial butterfly, or you sort of crash and burn. I don't think this is the end of Mike at all. I think
No, no.
it's very much the crescendo, and where he goes from here is up to him.
Yeah.
I do think some of it is how he responds though, because his responses, particularly in that video, I only watched 5 minutes of it, but he still couldn't resist throwing insults at his audience,
Yeah.
and I found that like, come on, Mike, please just stop. Um,
Yeah, but
so
it's
that
not.
kind of stuff is like Blaha-esque at that point.
Mm.
It's like you've been caught, you're wrong, own up to it, but then he just carries on, and it's like watching a train wreck. So
Yeah, and he's good. Like, so, some of us would see through that, but he's really good at talking as if I'm kind of taking responsibility for some things. You know, yeah, I am not the best bodybuilder. I had a bit that, kind of. But
mm,
then at the same time, the things that truly matter, those weren't really addressed. And like you say, because I watched it just briefly. You sent it to me. I saw this video right before this.
mm, yeah,
But yeah, it sounded like, yeah, and to those people, I like sincerely apologize. But and then it
yeah,
was something
yeah.
like they can also go F themselves.
You know what made me laugh? It was the interview with Eric Helms and Omar Isuf.
Mm,
The When he was explaining about how he could be better at anybody after a year or something like that. Some comment
yeah.
he made. But what was funny for me was the absolute horrified expressions on Omar Isov and Eric Helm's face, just like
Mm,
looking at it, go, Mike,
yeah.
cut the
Yeah,
mic.
yeah, yeah.
But
It's,
anyway, I don't want to keep banging on about. I don't want to be negative towards Mike. I just
no.
find the situation is interesting.
Mm, no, and I think, but that's the thing, though. We need to be able to be able to be like negative, like criticize, and maybe poke a little bit of fun, but it doesn't mean that we're just spreading hate towards Mike, right? Like there are
No,
some
no.
things to be brought up, and that's why I will do a thing like that. Maybe in the title, I'm a bit more aggressive. Then if you click it and listen to what I say, it's like, yeah, it's critique, but it's not just going on hating and making a fool out of someone like that. So,
Yeah, I
yeah.
agree. I agree. I think ultimately for me as well, I think these are lessons we can learn from us for ourselves in our own lives and things to avoid. That's the way I always look at things. So whenever I hear a story, even if it's just locally about something happening like that, I just
Mm,
tend to think, what can I learn? I mean, I don't I don't want to name any names because everyone knows who I'm talking about, but there was a very famous lolcow from 2010 era and
Mm,
the Ments, who is still very active now. But everyone knows what I'm talking
mm,
about. But
mm.
I think he's a very important lesson for how you should not live your life, because
Yeah.
almost everything he did, it should be like an example as a man. Don't do those things. And I
Mm,
think we all have that streak of laziness, of white lies, and like of dysfunction in us. Like we all struggle with that because we're all human beings. I certainly do. I'm not perfect at all.
mm.
And I think to myself, it's almost like a warning to men and women everywhere, just men or women. There are roads you can go down. There are levels of dysfunction which we all think, oh, that's a quick and easy way out. I'll take that white light here. I'll be a little bit lazier here,
Mm.
but it can just end up, if you let it avalanche so badly,
Oh
and
yeah.
then it can have consequences which are far-reaching after years, damaging your reputation. So I always view these things, and I viewed the Mike situation very much as an almost a warning sign for me to go, look, Faz, you're at 10K subs, you're starting to come up. Make sure
Mm.
you're avoiding doing some of these things which people point out in the comments.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, a saying I heard for the first time fairly recently was that, if you get on the wrong train, like you better get off soon, because the further you are stay on that train, the further back it is. And the person that you brought up, I feel like, he went straight to hell. I don't think it's
He,
I don't
he
think it's
was
any coming
huge.
back. Yeah.
He was the train conductor. He was, he
Yeah,
was
no, but very much what you say, because I noticed that I can always worry about myself sometimes, that I've seen this, that again, you're a human being, you suddenly get tons of attention, often because we talk about hate and negative comments, but also it can get to your head a little bit, like, well, all these people tell me I'm great, like, yeah, I am great, and that thing I say, that sometimes that's something I will just play up a little bit, which is really to inspire people. Let's say you can be this confident, but I've seen that I've actually become arrogant at sometimes, and what if I just stuck with that? Like when and I see these things, as you say, also as cautionary tales, and
yeah,
it's actually one of the most masculine things to do, to be able to admit when you were wrong, right? Like, and so that's actually what I tell my audience sometimes. That, look, guys, as a channel grows, and you start going in a direction, things going on in your life that affect you in a certain way. Sometimes maybe I have a period when maybe I come off a certain way. I'm driven by something that I can't see to begin with, And I promise you that I will always, like, try to, as soon as possible, like, steer my way back, and I will apologize. I'll admit when I did something wrong like that. So yeah,
I definitely I aspire to that. I wish I continue to have the strength to do that. But I wanted to go back to your comment about sort of this person we're talking about, and
sure.
I want to provide some context to the historical context to the early 2000s. Like Theo, if you don't mind me asking, how old are you?
I'm 32.
32. Okay,
And
so
you're like 43, right?
yeah. So uh, in the era of the late 90s to the early 2000s, there was a lot of anonymity on the internet, like with
Mm,
forums and everything. And so it was not unusual for people to lie quite a lot on forums. Like I specifically remember there was one gentleman um, who who stated very openly that he had what was effectively the world bench press record, which he just did in his back garden, and he would do on a weekly basis as part of his regular training.
mm,
Now, when he was quizzed about that, he couldn't obviously take any videos because he didn't have a camera, and apparently he lived out in the woods, so there was no cameras available. I don't know. This was back in the early days where a lot of BS was passed. Now, that guy, people idolized him. A lot of people who were actually strength athletes knew he was just full of
mm,
BS. But back in those days, there was a lot of this, and you would log onto a forum, and you would not be Theo, you would not be Faz, you would be Chad Thundercock 69,
mm.
and that would be your persona, and you would act like that.
Yeah.
So much BS was passed, and I think this individual who we've mentioned, I
I'd love
think,
to get that individual on the podcast.
are you really?
Oh yeah,
Are you really?
if he said yes, I'd have him, and I'd be super nice.
Oh, of course, no, of course. I have nothing against him at all. I just think what I was going to say was I think he, unfortunately for him, I think he was a victim of that transition because early
Mm,
2000s, late 90s, there was a lot of BS passed. And I'm sure he partook in that and he realizes that now, just like everyone else did. Now, as we transition to the 2010, 2015s, that was when people started to get smartphones and technology improved. You had more like Web 2 technology rather than Web 1 technology. And it was very difficult to hide who you were. I think he spanned that generation shift, and that is why he got caught. And obviously, he didn't know when to stop either.
mm,
But no, I've got nothing against him at all. Like we've mentioned him very respectfully, I think. But he's just trying to make a living like we all are. So no issue whatsoever. But
mm,
yeah, anyway, I think that's where he was unlucky because
mm,
early 2000s, Theo, you should have seen it. It was just an absolute mess.
mm,
Chad Thundercock, 69, had his apprentice, Miley Big Tits, and who was probably also a dude as well. And it was just a
mm.
complete mess. The forums were horrendous. So yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't into fitness back then, but I would say that I was early on the internet, so I kind of know just what you're talking about
Right.
outside of fitness. Just it
Okay,
was a
yeah.
different place. It was more of a Wild West situation going
It's,
on
it
online.
was very naive
I
times.
miss aspects of it. Definitely,
Yeah.
it was a fun time. Like just think of YouTube at the start. Things were shared on YouTube that definitely would not stay on the platform these days.
No. Yeah, that was what 2005, wasn't it? YouTube was around. I think that was the first few years.
Yeah, no, it's earlier because I know I was on it when I was like 11 years old. And
Really?
I'm born in 92. So 2004 or something, I think it came
Before,
around.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The first sort of fitness guy I saw was Omar Yusuf. He was on very early.
Mm,
I was never really into Scooby because I think he was early. I remember Alpha Destiny was on pretty early as well, but he was
mm,
sort of the next wave with Jeff Nippert about 2010-ish.
mm,
Omar was the OG that I remember anyway.
mm.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
good times.
Just a quick, because we got into some things that I did not expect that
Hmm.
I'm very happy about though. But just because you mentioned Alex, like in part for my research for you, for this podcast, I listened to your episode on his channel. And just one random thought that came to mind to ask you is I think about sometimes when I look like at a guy like that, like he's very impressive and great content, and
Hmm.
he's so freaking strong, And but when I like compare my physique to his, I'm like I don't see that we're all that different, but in terms of strength, it's like he's just way 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 stronger, and I just don't quite understand that phenomenon. Like I understand that especially the more advanced you get on either strength or hypertrophy, it differs, and it's strength. It's a bit more of skill in moving the weight, not just like muscular strength like that. But I'm like, how can a guy like that be so much stronger than me? And just I don't know. I feel like if I had his bench numbers, I'd be like huge. Like how does that work?
I think it depends on how you achieve those bench numbers. So
Mm,
from what we know, whenever you increase the size of the muscle, the actual muscle fiber thickness, you are going to also see an increase in strength. So there is a relationship going that way. Bigger muscle always equals a stronger muscle. Now that confuses people because people say, well, what about powerlifters? What about Alex? The fact of the matter is, the relationship the other way doesn't always work the same. So
mm,
you can get stronger. There are neurological factors, there are form factors. Neurological is the big one because once you're advanced, your form is about the same. But there are subtle things you can do with form, so the rep speed, leg drive, certain things you can do. But a lot of it is neurological. You can get neurologically stronger by generally the use of more practice at submaximal weights. That is the general route.
mm,
So Alex has done a lot of submaximal work at maximal weights. That doesn't lead to a corresponding increase in muscle fiber thickness. What it does do is it really enhances neurological drive. Like I would hate to be behind an Alex punch, for example. So probably punches very hard. So I think there are major differences. And I think if your only goal is hypertrophy, I think you should carry on training in the way that you're currently training. Just train for hypertrophy. I don't think you should try to emulate Alex's numbers via a more powerlifting, power, whatever route, because I think ultimately you probably won't get the size results you're after. So
mm,
ultimately, for that's the reason I think it's there are it's a the relationship only really works in one way. Stronger you can get disproportionately stronger without getting as big.
Mm,
You cannot get disproportionately big without getting correspondingly strong. It just doesn't
mm,
work.
mm,
And that what I've talked about there really much is in reference to the latest meta regression, which was promoted and discussed by Data Driven Strength, where they were pointing at this seemingly endless relationship of volume and growth, which I have heavily criticized on my channel. And I think that suggests that there is a dual relationship when in my mind there just isn't, because there is no physiological explanation for why that would occur. We know hypertrophy, if we're talking myofibular growth, as in the thickening of the fibers, we know we are literally talking about the increase of contractile elements within the muscles. Contractile, you are going to be able to generate more force
mm,
at a point when the strength stops, the hypertrophy stops. Now, if these guys are suggesting that it carries on infinitely out into oblivion,
mm,
I can accept that if they provide me with a physiological reason for why that has happened. Because so far, the rebuttals by Greg really were mostly vaguely saying the strength size relationship isn't clear, which I agree, it's not clear, but it's not clear in only one direction. And that is you can get disproportionately stronger without getting disproportionately large. It does not work the other way. And in Greg's defense, the defense he used was to say the strength size relationship is vague. And he made the example that you can get stronger without getting bigger. But the fact is, that's the opposite of what the study is saying. So
mm,
it's not a rebuttal, it's not a defense of the study. He's arguing for the opposite. But of course, his audience enjoys hearing him speak and are willing to accept the argument without looking at it further. But the
mm,
reality is that defense was not solid because it didn't defend the point he was making, which was he was saying size continues infinitely without the appropriate strength gain. That needs to be explained on a physiological basis. And one more thing, if they say that that is the data and it's on me or us or whoever else to disprove it, I would counter that by saying that meta analysis, even though it's a meta regression, I would counter by saying it does not match the greater body of work when we include physiology and exercise science. This is your Instagram research celebrities here. This is physiology. This is exercise science. They have to explain the gap. What is the physiological mechanism by which we are seeing endless size growth without the appropriate strength gain? That we can't just say that is the data. It doesn't match. Explain that because the larger body of physiology and exercise science says that is nonsense. So there needs to be a physiological explanation. And I think the conclusion they've drawn, I mean, I can offer you reasons why they got to that conclusion, but the conclusion they've drawn, we cannot just say that is the data. It is on them to explain the physiological mechanism because at the moment, all we have is fairies and gold dust, nothing
mm.
else.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting where you took that question. It's interesting to
Yeah.
listen to you. It's just because of time. Like I won't say too much more. Like I very much want people to give their takes on things. But just it's not that I'm like okay, and I'm just saying want to get to some other things too. But what I say is just that's just something I thought about, and I guess I know a bit about it, but to me, it's just kind of interesting how big the difference can be. Like with
Mm.
someone that's really
Oh
trained
yeah.
for strength like that.
Mm.
And for me, I've seen myself as sort of a power builder in not using just bench, squat, deadlift, but that I want to get strong on big movements, but not necessarily my one rep max strength, like my repping strength. So a sort of goal. I might have it now. I'm just gonna wait until I know for sure, but. I haven't had 3 plates on a bench, but I'd like to get that as sort of a side effect of not training for like as a one rep max bencher at all. Just get it as a side effect of hypertrophy like that. Just one more thing about that, just that I saw when I watched that interview with Alex. When I was scrolling through the comments, it was mostly positive, but then as I got further down, there was a lot of people saying that how can you have this guy on? Like he's clearly on steroids. Like look at those veins, like and the age like that. So what's your defense, Faz, to all these accusations?
I mean, I don't feel like I need a defense. I don't feel like I'm on trial or anything. But the vein thing, I mean, somebody was trying to make out that I've got blood pressure problems and whatnot. I can safely say my blood work is great. I do my blood work about once a year because I'm at the age where I think it's possible. It's a good
Mm,
thing to do.
mm,
And my blood pressure is absolutely fine. I don't feel like I come across as a very roid ragey person.
mm,
Um, So I don't know. I don't feel like I need a defense, but I think the vascular thing is definitely genetics. Like I had veins even when I was fat. I think as a child, I remember even just looking at myself when I was 15, 16 years old, having veins across my chest. It's very much a genetic thing. Or maybe it's just being fat and playing a lot of sports when I was younger. I don't know. Maybe my body had to work harder. It's not something I particularly enjoy. Like I don't like being vascular, but it's just something I've always had. You know, you can look back at pictures of me from 10, 15 years ago. So no, it's not. I think it's one of those things where also another thing is I don't think a lot of people really understand what it looks like to be quite jacked and older. And it sounds like I'm blowing my own horn here, but I'm just trying,
Mm.
just trying to give a bit of perspective. Again, it's not something I think about a lot, but like, if you're older and you're jacked, if you bulked up, you've gotten lean
Clearly,
quite a
you're
few
on
times.
steroids then.
Yeah, well, that's it. That must be the answer. So yeah. I mean, maybe that's what it is. Maybe somebody's secretly slipping, Dianabol into my cups of tea. That's what it
Mm,
is. But
exactly.
yeah, no, I don't know. I think mostly the whole it's all genetics, the vascularity anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, like,
No, I'm of course joking in the way I like question you about it, but
yeah.
it's
No,
like
no.
I like to bring up these things because to me, it's again, just get it done kind of thing again. It's that when I look at a guy like you and your background and the knowledge you have and the way you speak, and also like to me, I would feel like if because I get accusations too, right? And I would feel like embarrassed about how little small I am if I was actually on gear. I think people have such low standards, and
Yeah,
I like to talk about these things to kind of for the people that are like skeptical and think that everyone that looks decent like must be on. It's like no, this is like Fast has been doing this for a long time. Yes, great physique, and it's like, but it's not. It's because you've been doing it for such a long time. You're 43. You're not like 90. It's like it's not
I had
unrealistic to me at all to look at you. Like you have a great physique, but
a
yeah, you just
I
wanted
had a
to.
steroid accusation on my last video because I just finished the cut, and some guy, and he said something, whatever, and I said, look, I'm 170 pounds at 5'11". Like
Mm,
I'm not a big dude, so
mm,
clearly, if I am on my whatever is not working very well, I need to get a
mm.
refund from my dealer. So
Yeah.
yeah,
No, I think when I looked at your physique, I think your back and shoulders seem to be like the most developed, I would say. Like a
that's definitely a strong point. I
pretty
was
big lats.
Yeah, I was deadlift was my specialty. So when I was
Mm.
younger, so I deadlifted 300 kilos. Very proud of that.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, at 90 kilos. So that was my pet lift. I'm built like a deadlifter. I have long limbs, long legs, short like torso. So deadlift was my pet lift. So that was really where a lot of my back development came from. I was deadlifting heavy 2 or 3 times a week, light 2 or 3 times. I was high frequency. There was a
Mm.
wave of high frequency powerlifting back in 2010 era. Everybody was sort of obsessed with that kind of stuff back in England. So yeah, a lot of my physique was developed with that. Not even really just upper back work, just a lot of deadlifts. So
Mm.
yeah, I'd say I've been blessed with upper back's been good, lat's been good, forearms, calves, pretty strong. I think biceps and hamstrings are the weakest on me.
Mm.
I
Feels
managed to
kind of
break my
same for
thigh.
myself, actually. I think
Yeah,
we're not super, I wouldn't say that we're like our physiques, because you have different insertions and everything, but a little bit in strong points and that. I think we're quite strong and weak points. I think we're quite
that's
similar.
that's clearly because we're both fake natties. That's what it
Yeah,
is.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's something about those roids. They just don't hit the biceps, neither the lower or the upper ones that well.
Yeah, yeah. My hamstring was I tore it in 2007.
Mm,
So my hamstrings have never been that great, which is a shame. But yeah, no, side delts I managed to bring up. When I finished powerlifting, my side delts were terrible. So I did a year
mm,
specialization and I managed to bring them up so they're okay. But yeah,
mm.
biceps and hamstrings, unfortunately.
But so speaking of the just being a bit older, I mean, I think you're still a young man, especially with this lifestyle. Like ever since I got into this lifestyle, I honestly just look forward to being older, really. But it's interesting still to talk about. Like, have you noticed any differences with becoming a little older, or just things that you think differently about, or how you go about your training now?
Yeah, I think training is very different, Theo. I did a video on my channel a while back where I was saying I think the body changes fundamentally every 10 years. So, like when you're 20, there's quite a marked difference from when you were a kid. You could just run around, throw yourself around anywhere. And
Mm,
then when you're 30 again, I mean, you probably went through when you were 30, there was a difference in recovery and attitude in life. I mean, for you, it was a big change, obviously.
mm,
And I think when you're 40, there's another change physically and mentally. And I suspect there'll be another big change at 50. And I
mm.
don't mean exactly every 10 years, but
No, no, I
roughly,
understand. Mm,
yeah, roughly a stage of life. So yeah, I think training for me is different now. Um, I I train less. I still like to be in the gym every day. So part of my lifestyle, well, I say every day, I take Saturdays off, but
mm,
I train with weights 5 days a week. I do much lower volumes now. My weekly volume totals are really only about 3 to 4 sets, which is very different. It's very much what I started with. Like 3 to 4 sets per body part per week. I mean,
mm,
it's sort of what I started with, but in my 20s and 30s, I experimented with much higher volumes. And now, where I'm at now, obviously, one of it is I'm quite advanced, but two, I'm quite older. Recovery, I can drive myself into the ground. And I
mm,
accidentally did that last year. I was training with a couple of training partners who, if people watch my Instagram, they can see those guys. And they're young guys, they're really hungry. And we were really pushing ourselves hard. And I got that competitive spirit back again.
mm,
And we were driving ourselves into the ground. It was brutal. So I had to pull back on the volume quite a lot. And that's allowed me to still come back home. I get home for about 8:30 in the morning after I've been to the gym, and I can start my day feeling quite fresh and not needing to take a nap or anything. So
mm,
I've always been a fairly high volume, high frequency trainer, but my ability to tolerate higher frequencies and higher volumes has deteriorated. I find that I can train with higher frequencies now if my volume is really pared back. For me, higher frequency is the key for naturals to grow. I
mm,
think you don't have like we don't have the anabolic surplus that somebody's enhanced does.
mm,
And I'm talking about information which was shared to me back in the early 2005, 2006 era from a guy called Casey Butt, who was one of the original OG Natty guys.
mm,
And he was saying, look, you have to stimulate your muscles to grow multiple times a week. If not, and then later on, obviously, science kind of ratified him. But I think for naturals, the key to growth is to hit your body parts less volume, but quality volume much more frequently. And this
mm,
points back to the natural era of Steve Reeves, John Grimmick, where people were hitting their body parts about 3 times a week. I think, generally speaking, if you can handle it and if you can program it correctly, 3 times a week for each body part for naturals is pretty much ideal.
mm,
However you do that, whether it's full body 3 times, whether it's upper, lower, or whatever, for me, that's just a great system. And consistently, it's led to my biggest increases in size and strength. And I'm back to doing that now, and I absolutely love it. Progress is flying. So, for any naturals, my advice would definitely be pare back the sessional volume and hit it more often. Take a leaf out of the golden era or whatever. No, what do they call it? The bronze era. Yeah,
mm.
silver era, whatever they call it. Take a
Yeah.
leaf out of the 1940s and 1930s bodybuilders who were
Mm,
natural and train like them. The bro splits and the other and even twice a week, I think is a bit is lacking. Um, so you can pare back your volume right the way down. Like I'm really only doing about 1 set per body part 3 times a week for upper body. For
mm,
lower body, it's more like two, but that's just because there's more overlap.
mm,
So
mm.
obviously I'm a bit older. You guys might be able to do a bit more, but my point still stands. Frequency, lock that in first, then match your volume around the frequency if
Mm.
you're natural.
Mm.
Yeah.
Interesting. It's like I don't disagree with any of that, but my personal approach has been like pretty much hit everything twice. And I
Mm,
think this higher frequency thing, I understand completely the reasoning for it, but for me, it's like I think it would be so hard for me to not overtrain if I did that because
yeah.
I like to absolutely slay my workouts. Like, and I don't know if that's for everyone or not. It's something. I think about sometimes, is this like just my physicality or have I kind of adapted from like I trained, I would say that especially when I started, I trained way too hard, like just way more than I needed to do. But I didn't know better and I'm so stubborn and like afraid of doing too little. So I wonder like, have I just adapted to it? So I would definitely see that your recommendation works for a lot of people. I have nothing to say against it. But for me personally, like twice per week because I want to smash my workout so hard, so I need time to recover. Then there's some, like you say, there's some overlap with certain things. Like, I've always put like on upper or pull days, I just have like actual pull exercises, but of course the back is going to get some work from the lower body days also. And then I do right now, for instance, biceps. That is the weak point, right? I'm trying to bring it up. That I'm actually doing. 3 times per week with on one of the sessions like 2 exercises, but just one on the other two. So yeah, no, interesting. Well, so let's see. Yeah, because I just want to some things
I
we.
think I think I think with
Yeah, no,
upper
no, you
lower,
go ahead.
I think with upper lower, it's probably easier to get away with pushing yourself really hard per session because you have a longer time to recover. I think with full body, I've said in the past because I promoted full body quite heavily. It's very difficult to program full body. You have to have a system. Like
Mm,
my system for full body is what I was taught from Casey Butt, which was heavy, light, medium.
mm-hmm,
So I've always done a heavy day, a light day for which is basically a recovery day, and I think it mostly maintains the hypertrophy signal, and then a medium
mm,
day. And I think that works very well. You can also do a system where you aim for minimal overlap. So with my system, you're going to get some overlap. You're going to do maybe a shoulder press and a bench press, which then doubles up on volume for the triceps and the delts. I think you have to be very, very cognizant of overlap. So one day one may well just be an incline bench for the entire chest, shoulders, tricep
mm,
region.
mm,
And then you kind of match that across the week. So a very good push routine across the week might be an incline bench or a flat bench, a high incline press, and then maybe a dip. So you cover everything but across the week, where
mm,
some areas are more at maintenance and some areas are getting a strong growth stimulus. That's one way to do it. And then the other way to do it is my way, which is the heavy light medium system. I think you've got to really think about it when you're doing full body or when you're training a body part multiple times a week. And when I was doing the bodybuilding style stuff in the early 2007, 2010, I was training a body part maybe about 5 times a week. So you have to be very, very cognizant of your recovery and the overlap and all that kind of stuff. And here you have to have a system. So there's a lot of thought which goes into it. I think upper lowers comparatively, they're quite nice if you want to just blast it.
yeah.
And yeah, so the different programming considerations.
Mm. I love blasting it. But yeah, the first one of those two full body approaches, that's what I program for a lot of clients. Like 3 full body workouts with it's you train everything, but it's like this day is focused more on this, and this day is focused more on this, and so on.
Exactly.
But what I wanted to ask you before is a little bit just about your coaching because I am an online coach myself, right? So kind of I just want to like more like practically what does it look like when you work with clients like what is your typical client who could be interesting but kind of what is the process someone's like hey Faz, I want coaching with you how do we get started.
So I always start with the consultation because I want to make sure I can help them. You know, some people they come to me and they're doing pretty much everything right anyway. So
Mm,
a lot of what they need is accountability, which is fine. Accountability is still an extremely useful,
mm,
skill. So I want to make sure I can help them. So we'll talk about what exactly I can help them with. We lay down some goals. I think goals. I recorded a video today actually, which is going to be up next week on rates of progression. So I think having a good perspective of what you want to achieve over the course of 6 to 12 months is important for the coach to know what the client wants to do, but also for the client to understand what is achievable. And I'll always cross-check that. So I'll see this is an achievable plan. And luckily, I'm at the point where most of my clients who come to me now have realistic goals, but I can sort of help to steer them in the right direction and make
mm,
sure the goals aren't contradictory either. Because a lot of guys who come to me, they do just want to be jacked. They don't really care about strength. They kind of have this
mm,
idea that if I get stronger, I'll look jacked, but really
mm,
is they want to get jacked.
yeah.
So, we clarify the goals, make sure they're getting what they want. And then, I start to create a plan. So based on all my clients get an individual plan. So based on what is laid out as their specifications, I think that's important. I think generic plans can work, but I think if the client is paying you good money, it's a one-to-one client, you've got to get them a personal
Mm,
program. I'll also want to match their cardio with their lifestyles. For some people, cardio is appropriate, as in hard cardio. Some people it's not. It kind of depends on how active they are, how busy they are, how much time they have. And then also maybe look at days per week of training, what can be done. And within those days a week, match that up with their goals. So just like we've talked about, it may be a full body 3 times a week, it may be an upper lower 4 days a week. It really depends on that. And also look at their training history as well. So in effect, what you and I do very much is the epitome of being evidence-based. You take your own
Mm,
practical experience, what is in the studies, and also what is the client specification, and that is essentially being evidence-based. Now, on a week-to-week basis, what I have sort of phone communication with clients whenever they need to. Okay.
mm,
But you mentioned before about doing too much for clients. I do
mm.
think there needs to be a level of independence,
Yeah.
And I think when you're a new coach, like Theo, how long have you been doing the online stuff for?
So I started with 10 clients in 2022. Like I collected clients in December and I started my company and yeah. So yeah,
Couple of
it's I
years.
guess 3 years. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. I think when you're relative, you're not a new coach, but when you're a relatively new online coach, I think there is a temptation to want to just spoon feed everything. Like,
Mm,
let me come to your house digitally and
mm,
give you this next meal. And I think we have to kind of avoid that because one, they don't want that, generally speaking. And I think two, they have to be taught a level of independence. So you're trying to create athletes, you're trying to create bodybuilders, you're trying to create functional human beings who are able to do things on their own
mm,
without reminders and prompts all the time. So I think the goal always should be eventually full independence of the client. My happiest feeling is if a client can graduate my coaching after say 18 months, 2 years, 3 years,
mm,
and be a legitimate, you know, bodybuilder, healthy person, father, son, husband, whatever they want to be, and be competent in mentally and physically in life. So I want to be able to teach them everything. So I think competency is hand in hand with independence. So what I generally do is I do let them have access to me 24/7. I think that's fine. I think that's okay. But the goal should be to educate them in a way that they're not looking for that daily, like, hey,
mm.
coach, what do I do now? I got my next meal. Like, okay, eat it. Like,
Yeah.
put it in the microwave. So what I do is I send a weekly check-in, which is very extensive. And I think a lot of coaches kind of avoid doing this. Certainly the ones that I've spoken to, they no longer do weekly check-ins where it's a 10 to maybe 20 minutes check-in where you're just going through what happened their week, what they need to do for the next week, establishing goals, talking through creating that sort of bond. They can see your face, they can see you talking. And I think that's very important. I think the very old school way of doing things is just via emails or a paragraph or two of text. And some
Mm,
coaches still do that. And I don't like that. I don't like this is one of the reasons why I don't like the sort of the text coaches, like
mm,
WhatsApp coaches. I
mm.
just think it lacks it. It sounds good because it's like, right, talk to me 24/7 every day. What it lacks is it lacks that connection. I think when you're sending a check-in video, you get that connection there. You get somebody who's talking to you in depth because you're a paying client. You
Mm.
want to be handled with care and time. So if somebody asks me a question, I would much rather get on a video and spend 5, 10 minutes talking through the answer with context because they're paying me good money. So I want to give them a great answer. And they
Yeah.
can take that answer, they can put it into practice, and then they can go on with their life. I think the daily texts are fine for like quick answers and questions and clarifications and stuff like that. But I think ultimately speaking, I think you've got to try and form a connection. Now, as the nature of the role, we're online coaches, it's very difficult to schedule in a weekly meeting, like
Mm,
live, like we're doing right now. I think
mm.
that can be tough because people have commitments. If somebody misses their appointment, it can have a knock-on effect to the rest of your day, which can be disastrous. I did used to do that actually. It was a complete pain in the ass. But so nowadays I will send a check-in video and I will encourage them to send me a check-in, either video, audio, or text. So at least once a week, we need to have a detailed exchange where
Mm.
we are going through their week and their goals and also building a relationship as well. Inevitably, I end up becoming friends with my clients as well
Yeah.
as, being a mentor, which is one of the nice things about the role. I'm quite sociable as well, so it's quite nice for me.
Mm.
So there's that. I think that has to be the central point. And then on top of that, you have the, 24/7 contact if you want it. And obviously you also have the client's program. And I use a spreadsheet which I've built and created over the last 10 years and have added to. In the beginning, it was very basic. Now it's a lot more complicated. It has charts and graphs and a lot of automations for clients. So they need to fill out very little, but the spreadsheet creates a lot of data for them. So that is our central, basically, log of everything that has been said, everything that has been agreed, everything that has been done. So when we look back over 12 months, 18 months, we can look back on their journey and go, wow, this is what we've accomplished. This is where we started. And some of my best clients have been with me 3 or 4 years at this point, and we can look back at where they started and go, wow, you
Mm.
were a complete beginner, and now look at you. And that's amazing. But also on a local basis, you can look back and go, right, we agreed to this, this, and this. This needs to be done by this date, and set deadlines and timelines. And I approach it very much almost like as a school teacher, you set different goals, short term, long term. You have formative assessment periods, like on the way to a goal. You have summative assessment periods at the end of the goal, and you celebrate. So I still work in blocks, not because 12 weeks is anything special, but because at the end of 12 weeks is a good time we can look back and go, right, how did we do?
Mm.
Because we need to know that. I don't want to be just a cheerleader coach where I high five the person and gas them up and they think, wow, I've had a really great time. I want them to get results. They need to
Yeah.
get, this is what I'm known for, hard, concrete results. So we will do an evaluation every 12 weeks where we look back and go, did we achieve? If we did, great, fantastic. But equally, if we didn't, what went wrong? We need to
Mm.
fix that, because if we're not fixing it, I'm not learning, they're not achieving. And ultimately, I could kind of sneak my way around it by saying, yeah, you're doing great, kind of like gaslighting
Yeah.
them. But that doesn't help me. It doesn't help them, because ultimately they're not going to get the results. So I pride myself very much on being very results driven while building that relationship, because I think you have to be as a coach. So sorry, I kind of rambled there, but I mean, I really like this stuff. I think
Yeah.
it's what I've done full time for 5 years, and I feel very passionately about the system that I've got now. I think is just spot on. I know how to get results, and I know how to quantify everything so that we have a progressive system where they feel taken care of, but they also have goals and they feel driven, but they feel supported. So I think,
Mm.
once you've been coaching for a while, you kind of be able to, you develop your own system, which works for your personality and your systems. And but that's what I do.
Mm. No, that's great. And like, no one has to apologize for rambling on this podcast because that's kind of what I want.
Yeah.
I say, I talk so much in my life and in my content, and I want to listen to people. And this specifically, I definitely was just curious to hear because you've been in this for a long time, and you give me good ideas because we talk about this like doing too much for clients. I can feel sometimes like both, like I'm doing too much in one way, but too little in another way. And I think this sometimes maybe having this like clear actionable things like a weekly check-in, even if it's a short one, that's actually, I wrote that down for myself, that's a good thing because I try to encourage people that I on the one hand I have this sort of thing because I've been coached in certain things myself, that I know that if I just give you something like here's the program, here's the macros, here's the sort of strategy, go, that they have to figure out some things on their own, and whatever little question comes up they'll ask me, right? So many times you just give someone a starting point and they'll find the questions to ask when they start. But sometimes I find, because so that's a good place, I think, sometimes to not do too much, just like here's the starting point, go and find out what you have to ask. But when there's some kind of just general, like you can check in whenever you want, and I want you to check in more, like I haven't heard from you, I want you to check in more. Many people just end up not doing it anyway, I feel like, so maybe having a more actionable thing like that is good.
I
um
would suggest the more actionable thing. I think otherwise you might find it rests on the personality of the client. So they might either check in way too much, which is
mhm.
unnecessary, and then it almost becomes like a
I'll say
parasocial
that's
relationship.
been rare in my case. It's been very
Yeah.
few that I think ask too much. It's usually the
Yeah.
other way around, honestly.
I think that, or just not checking at all, which I
Mm.
think is it's just I find laying down the parameters for communication really helps, because yeah, like you say, most often people wouldn't check in enough, but I think it's nice. I the feedback that I get is people like the check-in because it's like a weekly reset. Like, right, I handed my assessment in for my teacher. Here's what I've done, and here's they're kind of showing off. Like, I nailed this week, I did it.
Mm.
Or equally, look, coach, I had this problem, I couldn't do this, and I can offer them my perspective. Very much like like what we do on YouTube. You can offer your perspective. Here's what I would do in that experience. Here's
Mm.
what another client has done, and you can offer that perspective, which is what they're looking for. But I think touching base, like as a human to human, once a week at least, I think is super, super useful. And then obviously, they're going to have questions. So you got your phone. I think
Mm.
though the texting, I just find it's the quality of the exchange on text I don't
Yeah.
like. I think it can be very quick. And if you're not really in the mood for it, it can just be too rushed. And I don't like that because I get very good client retention with my clients. They stay with me for a long time. And I think it's because if you treat somebody as a human being, with that care and respect, they can see that and you can build a relationship. I think texting for me, again, for quick fire questions is not a problem, but it doesn't encourage building a relationship. I know one coach, for example, he has something like 150 clients, and all day long, all he does is just text.
Yeah.
And I've heard from his ex-clients who come to me and they say, yeah, all he does is just text me going, "Did you do your workout today?" And they go,
Mm.
"Yeah." They go, "Oh, great, cool, keep killing it." Like that's not coaching. Coaching is very much like what you and I are doing here, which is talking through
Mm.
feelings, emotions, processes,
Yeah.
like a real conversation. That's what coaching is. That's what it should be. It shouldn't be this like checkbox activity where you just say, "Hey, how did it go today? Cool, killing it," and then take the snapshot, put it on your Instagram, look at my happy clients. I just think that's such a sham.
Mm.
And I've seen so much of that in this industry, and I've only been in it for a short amount of time in terms of the online stuff,
Mm.
like the YouTube stuff. I mean, having been exposed to other coaches, like that kind of coaching is just an absolute sham. And to be honest, Theo, it makes it harder for coaches like you and me because
Mm.
regular people who have been coached by these sham coaches, they don't want coaching anymore. They go, "Oh, I
Yeah.
had a coach. He was terrible. He was crap. All he did was text me all day." It's like, well,
Mm.
that's not me. It's better. Trust me. You can actually have a relationship. You can learn things. Because I mean, how else do you teach somebody something if you can't build a relationship with them? You actually speak to them for prolonged periods of time. So every week, my clients will get a check-in, which can be up to 20 minutes, 25 minutes in some cases. And
Mm.
now I will say I'm putting a cross on my back for that because it's a lot of work.
Mm.
But ultimately, that's my job. That's what they're paying me good money for. So
Mm.
I think that is the way to. They get a mini podcast every week on
Mm.
them, and I
Mm.
think it's not the only way to do things. I'm just saying it's my way,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I think you have to form a connection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I was even before this, like before we went on, I wanted to hear how you work with these things because you've been doing it for a longer time than me, at least, and even not just online. I'm sure you know, you have more experience pretty much. It's good to see because I'm someone that definitely wants to, like you say, they pay good money. I want to be there, and sometimes I just felt like it's not because I necessarily are not willing and wouldn't help, but it's like sometimes with certain people, I feel like I'm refining the process somehow. So there's just, I don't know, better communication. Because I think maybe sometimes, so I know how I am with a coach. I know that many, I know you might relate to this, that many of the best coaches are also the best clients, because they know like how this works and how they get the most out of the coach and that. So maybe sometimes, you kind of project that, they'll just do this because obviously that's how it works. And I'll say because of time, I won't go into my own coaching too much, but I have different levels to it. And with a more expensive program that is also more holistic, I have a long check-in, like it's a weekly long hour call, And then, of course, with those people, there's always a lot of time to check in on everything, not just training, but specifically with the people that I don't call with as often. I felt like there must be something I can do to just improve the communication. It's not with all people, of course, but with certain
Yeah,
people
yeah.
sometimes.
I mean, I think you're right. I think you have to strike a balance as well. You have to strike a balance between how much how much the coaching is worth versus how much time you bring in, because there are very real concerns about how much time we have in the day to do things. So
Mm,
I do think it's a thinker. It's not again, it's not all the time. But yeah, no, I think it's an interesting striking a balance. I think is important.
mm,
But yeah, no, I mean, I'm happy to talk about all that kind of stuff, and I think it's fascinating. It's very interesting.
mm.
Yeah, you got to strike a balance.
Yeah. No, before we move on, what I'll say is that I feel like, that's about taking too much responsibility. It's
Mm.
like, again, just like how I talked earlier about wanting to change the hater, like, no, I can change you. I think that I feel like if someone just kind of disappeared on me, because that happens sometimes too, right? I always feel that was my fault somehow. Like, was there something I could have done? But actually, when I look back, anytime something hasn't gone like well with someone, I feel like, no, I always tried. Like, I tried to text them, I tried to get a hold. Should we have a call? And it was in the end, it was me that had to be like, okay, I tried, 3 strikes and you're out, kind of thing or something. I tried. So I
Yeah,
guess you can't help them all. It's up. it takes two to tango, pretty much.
Yeah, cool. I mean, I think the other thing you can do if you don't do already is I have feedback a couple of times a year. So I have a feedback form which I open up anonymously. If they
Mm,
want to do it anonymously, they can a couple of times a year to all my clients. I actually used to do this on YouTube as well before it got bigger. So
mm,
I actually was brave enough to offer a anonymous feedback form on YouTube, which
mm,
I'll be honest, people were very nice about it. People were extremely kind with their comments, but also were supportive in terms of helping me grow the channel. So it was
mm,
very much appreciated. I might do that again, but I think twice a year with my clients, I just open it up and just say I send a message to say I'm collecting feedback. If you'd like to say anything, you can do it anonymously. Otherwise, and it's just questions like, what do you like me doing? What would you like me to do more of?
mm,
What is something which you don't like that I did? And what would you like me to do less of?
mm,
And stuff like that, just to encourage them. Mostly it's just to encourage them to speak, but just prompts basically.
mm,
And I'm sure you find this as well, Theo. If you're an entrepreneur, if you're in business for yourself, getting feedback is so difficult.
mm,
Like it's obviously from clients is your main source of feedback, but generally speaking, like you just said, clients will either really like you or they'll leave. Like
mm.
there's very few who sit and give you
Yeah.
feedback.
Mm,
And I think it's very difficult to do that with other entrepreneurs. One thing I will always credit NH for, Natural Hypertrophy. I asked him for feedback on my YouTube channel about 2 years ago, and he took his time. He emailed me lots of information. I'll
mm,
always support him for that. I think he's a great guy.
mm,
And he took his time out of his day to really help me. And I really appreciated that. So, but it's unusual to do that. I
mm,
think if I was to ask Bald Omni Man, or Basement Bodybuilding, or Freaky D, or whoever else, or GVS, if I was to ask them for advice, I know they would help me. I know, but I also know they're very busy people, so
mm.
I don't necessarily like asking them all the time. But
Yeah.
like, but I think getting feedback as an entrepreneur is difficult. So
Mm,
this I do open up, and it's one avenue I can take.
mm. No, well, great, man. Let's move on, but you definitely gave me some food for thought for how to further improve, optimize the coaching. I'll say to any client that's watching, give me feedback if you want to, like just generally right now. Just tell me if there's anything. So, couple last things I want to talk about that we probably don't have to get too deep into, but kind of just a diet question. Like how important is diet for bodybuilding really? Honestly, apart from cutting, because we all understand that we have to be in a calorie deficit one way or another. But how much does the diet and the quality of the food matter, the macros? A little bit about just your diet, like what kinds of foods do you focus on? And I just know that you have a kind of different stance on protein than many people in the fitness sphere. So you're good at going on the rant, so please take it away with those kinds of things around diet.
So, sorry if I've been
No,
ranting
no,
too.
it's
My
great.
audience is used to me, so
Mm,
but yeah, no, I think I have made some videos recently about higher protein, and something I've been promoting for a long time. What I will say though is, I think diet is very much secondary to the training. Training is number one, always. I think everything else we do around training or should be seen as levers.
mm,
Now, the OG Fazlift subscribers will understand that analogy. I use it a lot, but seen as levers. If you are struggling to gain muscle mass in the gym through the gym work you're doing, and let's assume you're working hard in the gym with a good routine, okay, and you're under a good coach. Everything else in your life, your sleep, your food, your general relaxation, meditation, all that kind of stuff, should be seen as levers you can pull at the appropriate time to enhance the results in the gym. The gym is the number one promoter of muscle gains and whatever. Everything else is to be seen as levers. So for me, protein intake is that lever. If you are if you are in the gym and you're making progress and you're eating these evidence-based, I say that in quote marks, evidence-based zero point 0.8 grams per pound, great. You don't have to go to high protein. And I would not recommend high protein for that person because they're progressing, they're doing
mm,
well.
mm,
Um, but if you're not, protein could be something you turn up to see if that benefits. And I have seen in myself and in my clients robust results in that situation where training wasn't progressing as well as they'd hoped. We increased protein as one of the levers and it helped. Equally speaking, though, it could be sleep, it could be stress management, like meditation, it could be overall calories. There are other levers to pull. But my stance has been to highlight the fact that I do generally favor higher proteins, and that is because it is a lever you can pull. So I hope that is clear for my audience and yours as well. It's not that I just unequivocally recommend high protein off the bat for everyone. I say let's start with reasonable amounts, and then it may be a lever we pull. But I mean, if you've got a guy who's benching 2 plates a side or a plate and a half, he's not going to need mega amounts of protein. It's just like whatever, like you're training, you're doing your thing. But some of my advanced guys, some of the guys who are pretty jacked, it might be a lever they need to pull because they're at the point where it does start to matter and they're committed enough to be able to eke out those extra few things. You know what it's like, Theo. You say something on YouTube and the message can get
Yeah,
very
yeah.
one-dimensional. So, but that is my actual stance on high protein.
Interesting. What I heard you say to Alex was that you think that like the data, that like the scientific data is correct, but not always interpreted in the right way. And that's what I feel like sometimes too, that it's just like, no, see, this is all you need for building muscle, kind of not thinking about the bigger picture, because there are other reasons that protein, like I want to always say that, protein, it matters, but you'll be able to build muscle if you eat enough, even if you're below like the recommended protein. But why not? Like it's a kind of low hanging fruit. Why not go for it? But then the other thing is like when it comes to, because I've had lots of these clients from fasting also, like struggling with weight loss in one way or another, and the food addiction. And protein is the most satiating macronutrient. It's also the one that you actually burn a bit more energy when you digest. So, effectively, calories from protein are a little lower, So it's just a good strategy to maybe even eat higher protein than would be like optimal, what you need to build muscle. It's not the only thing there, And so I think sometimes when it becomes like, what is the protein, what is the best that we need to build muscle? And it's like, people forget that that's not the only thing we're looking at
Yeah.
here.
No, absolutely. I think that's a very that's it. The evidence-based community can take a very one-dimensional view of protein, but yeah, no, I sort of take my lead from some early work by Lyle McDonald. We're talking the protein book way back in late 90s, I think it was. But he pointed out even back then the data which we use now only looks at muscle protein synthesis. So it doesn't look at the synthesis of other tissues in the body, which is like, organs, skin, all that kind of stuff, nails, hair, everything else. So to grow this beautiful gray beard that I've got, like I need more protein. So there are other structures in the body which require protein. So the research only looks at muscle protein synthesis. The other side of it is it only looks at synthesis, not the degradation of muscle protein. And we know the balance between synthesis and degradation is where we get the net synthesis from. So we are, in terms of what we need for muscle protein synthesis, the number is perfectly accurate. So zero point 0.7, cool, fantastic. But there is a whole bunch of other stuff we're not accounting for. And it's not like you and I can wake up one morning and go, I want to eat this steak just for my muscle protein synthesis. The body will think, I'll handle this. I need some protein for your kidneys or your lungs, and that's more important right now. So when it comes to somebody who's not quite yet nearing the peak of their potential or whatever, like getting to the top end of the zone, or perhaps not training very hard, they may not need those higher levels of protein because their body isn't at that point where the balance between synthesis and degradation is starting to get, starting to get troubled. So you have a beginner. I mean, the anabolic stimulus is so strong. They have so much room to grow. They don't need quite as much protein at all. So a lot of these things, they do start to come into play when people are either more advanced, or another situation is when they're dieting. So we see the need for higher protein when people are dieting. So that should belay the fact that, hey, this is something good, or for recomposition. People just think that is a separate case. Like, okay, well, that's relevant for just cutting or recomping. They don't think ahead, like, well, why are we getting benefit there? It would make sense if we got benefit when we're bulking as well. I think people throw around things like, carbs are protein sparing, but I don't think that's quite the full case. So that's my stance on that. And I think this is just interpretation of science. And what happens in our community is we have an echo chamber, as you know. And as soon as one person says one thing, somebody else says another thing. And before we know it, it's an accepted truth.
Mm,
But the reality is step outside the community and it's not. And it's the same with the going back to the meta-aggression. It's the same thing there. We have the current view is there is an almost unlimited ceiling of growth of volume and hypertrophy. You step outside, any physiologist would say, "What the
mm,
hell? Are you talking about?" Any exercise scientist would go, "What the hell?" But in our little bubble of hypertrophy research, Instagram celebrities, that's apparently accepted truth. And
mm,
that's the result of 10 years of research, not 50 years of going back to the actual greater body of work. So I think that's how these things like the protein thing gets passed. And me talking about higher protein levels that I've seen my clients use, people will then turn around and go, well, that's not evidence-based, not realizing actually it is that. And that's why I put the point eight in quotations earlier. My view is, my recommendation is evidence-based. And
mm.
and I don't think the evidence-based community is correct. I think I'm looking at the data, as is Lyle, as are a few other people, and that is the correct interpretation. But equally, like I said at the beginning, I'm not saying everyone needs to eat high protein right now, today,
Mm.
otherwise they won't gain. But there is a ceiling of benefit which hasn't been found yet.
Yeah. To on that note, because that was something I felt like we could have talked a bit more about, but since you mentioned this about how this is actually evidence-based, and you mentioned this how the scientific community, and I would say even more so the people that follow it, can become one-dimensional about things, is that this is not just with fitness. What I see and I'm kind of bothered by, my handle is uncommon sense. And to me, it's sort of a mindset, it's sort of an approach to things that I kind of living life with just, I was never a conformist, but still listening too much to things I've been told that things work this way and you should do that and this and that. You just have a bunch of ideas about things in your head that you don't really have true experience with. And I've noticed now that I can decipher so much what's true and works just through my own experience. That's not to like say that so I won't look at the science at all. It's just that you kind of cannot interpret it in the right way if you don't also have the practical experience with the thing. And because that's when, like you say, someone, to me, that's someone that's way too much in their head. They just listen, they watch content creators and just hear ideas and like, no, this is not what the evidence says. But it's like, we are not talking just about the evidence from that study that says this about protein. You have a whole like line of reasoning about everything there, and lots of
Absolutely.
experience with it. And yeah, that was something I was thinking about going into this. And yeah, it's frustrating sometimes that people cannot quite even see the value of, just because I make some nuance here and not just like parrot completely what this study said, that I'm actually more evidence based here.
I think to your credit, it's amazing that you're brave enough to question things like so early on. Like I it took me a lot later in life to
Mm,
question those accepted things. I very much went along with them, and now I've seen a measure of success in on YouTube and in my coaching. Like I'm a lot more comfortable with putting my foot down and going, no, like that's wrong. I'm right. And I did that with the protein video. And I said, look, everyone else is wrong and I'm right. And
love
and
that.
within like a month, Milo made that video talking about some other study, which by the way, I did disagree with Milo on that, but
Mm,
I'm still right though, like with the protein thing.
mm,
So I'm more comfortable in saying that. And my last video about the data-driven strength and the volume hypertrophy thing, I think that was also me putting my foot down and going like, that's wrong, and here's why. And
mm,
I'm a lot more confident with saying that now. And I think as long as it's done in a respectful way, like I
mm,
wasn't I wasn't calling out, Greg or whatever. Like I was very respectful, I think. And I think long as it's done in a respectful way, it is scientific because it's scientific discourse, it's debate. And I think as long as people aren't being tribal, they should handle that in a very respectful way. And as I like to think I always, I mean, hopefully you've seen my videos and you see that I generally like to speak in a very moderate kind of way. So,
mm,
but I think that's good for discourse. I think it's okay to put your foot down and go, hey, I believe this. Here are my reasons why.
mm.
And I think that's okay because that's the only way discussion happens.
Yeah. And so to end that kind of chapter a little bit, it's like what I think of, you learn that when you start going your own way, like being an entrepreneur and all these things, you just notice that people that have good results with things, they often they have to have that mentality of no, you're all wrong and I'm right. That because it just honestly, I want to be people person. I love people and want the best for everyone, but the average person just don't have a clue. They don't have a clue about so many things, and they're just listening to everything they're being told. And you have to dare to. It's not like go on an ego trip and never think that I never listen to anything outside of myself. The way I see it, you consider things, but if I put things together through uncommon sense, like I say, and I see that not what most people are going with here, I'm just not seeing that that's true, then I will go with this, right? And so I think it's a big thing. It's honestly, it's thinking for yourself is what I try to teach people to do in that way. So it's great. I love that. You're all wrong, and I'm right. So just one last thing I wanted to ask you about is we talked a little bit about it just before hopping on recording, but you pointed out that you appreciate the sort of holistic side of things that I do, and of course it's a little bit up to interpretation exactly what that means. But I would just want to ask you, because you mentioned wanting to talk about some other things in your content, and that like what is like what kind of holistic perspective do you have on all of this? Really, like it's a quite open thing. I'm just trying to like you like my holistic bodybuilding, like. What's yours?
I would love to speak a bit more about mental health, men's mental health. I think it's an area where I don't know what it's like in Europe, in Greater Europe, but certainly in England and in America, I don't think it's something that's given due thought. And I think it's misinterpreted fairly heavily. I think men's mental health. I think men in general aren't the best at expressing themselves, and and that's and that can be misinterpreted too, because if you don't have the answer to a question, it doesn't mean you don't know it or you don't feel
Mm,
it. I think you and I clearly are examples of men who are quite good at expressing themselves,
mm,
but not all. You will have friends who aren't. So do I. I'm probably the most articulate out of my friends, and that's fairly obvious. So I think even if a guy can't particularly interpret what he's trying to say or feel very well, I think, and he needs help, I think we need to find ways to help him. So I think in terms of mental health, what I would love to speak about is more about what I do, what I've seen as commonalities of people who have good mental health versus people who have destructive habits and the type of lives that they live. Because I've lived enough years and talked to enough people and taught enough people and coached enough people that I can see similarities. And when people are stuck, like I mean, yours, the reason I said to Stu at the beginning, I loved hearing your example, it was so inspirational, was because it really struck home. Like the things that you said about how you used to act and how that
mm,
made you feel was exactly what I've seen. That level of sort of inaction, and I'll do it later, has
mm,
such a cumulative destructive effect. And the fact that you came to that realization yourself is absolutely incredible because many people don't. It's really a very inspiring story. And I'm so glad that you went through that journey because a lot of people don't because they don't know. They don't even know.
mm,
And nobody tells them. So they stay stuck in this mode of that's just how life is done. So before they know it, they're 35, 40, they're my age basically. They're 40 in their 40s. They're alcoholic or they're a gambler. They're dysfunctional. They are being loud and abrupt and aggressive and drunk everywhere they go. They're falling out with their wives. They're falling out with their friends. And I'm Theo. I'm describing people I know. I'm not just
mm,
making up
yeah,
a straw man here. I'm describing people I know. Like I have ex-teacher friends who are basically functional alcoholics, and I don't speak to them anymore because the older they get, the worse it is, Theo. It's like in your 30s it starts. In your 40s, you're beyond help almost. In your
mm,
50s, you're gonna be dead. So I would love to speak more about the habits and the commonalities. But honestly, if anybody's heard anything that Theo said on his channel, then you're in good hands because Theo, by the sounds of it, you've got that stuff covered completely. And I think you and I would agree on a lot with these conversations, in terms
mm,
of your experience and my sort of observation.
mm. No, that's great. That's a powerful note to end on. I think I don't have too much to add to that. I'm really happy that we got into that. Like I didn't expect that so much at that point. But that's why it's so important to talk about these things because like you say, you've been wanting to talk about it, and I just kind of like, well, I just go like just let it out, and then suddenly like, yeah, I recognize exactly what you're talking about, and yeah, that's the kind of feedback I get a lot. Um, No, that's great, man. But I could go on, but we've gone for 2.5 hours. I think this was a good. I'm sure I'd love to have you back in the future. I'm trying to get good mileage with just individual guests, but many that I would like to bring back on. But before we go, fast, is there anything you'd like to say to me or to our audiences?
Well, first of all, to Theo's audience, thank you for watching me. If you've gotten this far, really appreciate that. And yeah, again, if you guys don't know who I am, which I'm sure you won't, my channel is Faz Lifts, mostly on YouTube, but Instagram I put client updates and sometimes my own training and stuff like that. But to you, Theo, I just want to say thank you very much for the invitation. Genuinely, I had a really enjoyable conversation here for 2.5 hours. It went by like this. I think
Mm,
you're a great host, and I think you're the kind of guy who I would love to crack a beer open with on a weekend. I really genuinely enjoyed this 2.5 hours. So good time to spend on a Thursday. Similar to you, just for the audience's sake, we were just talking about how busy we've been this week, and Theo was talking about how busy he's been and stuff, and I've been chock a block. But this has been actually a very nice distraction for me. I'm going to get back to work now, but
mm.
this has been so again. Thank you. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, well, thank you as well. I can just mirror all of that back to you. But if we drink on the weekend, I'll probably have some sparkling water. I don't drink much beer.
No, I don't drink alcohol either. Actually, I don't know why I said that. Maybe I'll drink a Diet Coke.
Yeah,
Yeah,
nice.
we can watch a film.
Mm.
Do what men do.
No, absolutely. I enjoyed it too. I was quite stressed before the call for unrelated reasons, and it's good to just get into the flow and shoot the shit about just meaningful shit that you care about and that I know will be very valuable to people. So, yeah, you told us where we can find you, Fast Lifts on YouTube and Instagram, and yeah, well, guys, thank you so much for this time. Thank you, Fast, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.